Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. This is part 1 of our story. If you like this what if story and want to see part 2, let me know in the comments below. Before we start, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video with your friends. Also, check the description for more great content and my playlist. This story was posted by Prttygoodnoob on Wattpad. Now, let's start. Izuku sprinted to where he heard the scream. The scream had been down an alleyway. Izuku looked down the corner and his blood ran cold. 2 bodies laid in the alleyway. One of them wasn't that far from the entrance while the second one was all the way down at the end. However, there was someone else down there. They were a girl, couldn't be older than Izuku himself. They had blonde hair done into 2 messy buns at the top of her head. She was wearing a small skirt and a cream-colored cardigan. But what she was doing chilled Izuku. She sat atop of that dead body. They were pouring out blood and it covered a lot of her clothes. She held a knife covered in lots of blood and was adamantly liking it. Izuku had to do something but he didn't know what. This girl had killed 2 adults and it looked like with little issue. What was her quirk? From how much Izuku can see from her, there isn't much he can determine. He had to stop her. Izuku can't allow a murderer run free and this person seems giddy about murdering others. But what was Izuku going to do? She was obviously dangerous and very capable at what she does. Even with his quirks, it might not be good enough to take her down. Wait. His new quirk. Izuku had completely forgotten about it. The quirk from that girl with the glowing freckles. The one he had to save Akito from. Izuku hadn't had time to test it out but he knows he produces light from freckles that connect together to create barriers. Luckily for Izuku, he has plenty of freckles to use. He also had the energy spear quirk but he currently can't use it. Not until he figures out how to increase his quirk capacity. That reminds Izuku. He knows this may not be the best time to be thinking about his quirk. There are 2 dead people with a murderer sking the blood out of one of them. But Izuku knows no matter how hard he tries, his curiosity will take over him no matter what. Can he take quirks from dead people? It isn't known how quirks work when people die, if they disappear or just sit there, unable to activate. Izuku knows mutant quirks don't disappear after death but that wasn't too much of a leap to make. But it was obvious that neither of these people have a mutant quirk so they either have a transformation or emitter quirks. Can he still take their quirk at post-mortem? Izuku slowly creeps into the alleyway, not wanting to alert the girl of his presence. He got low and reaches his hand towards the body before stopping. This person was dead and he was about to touch them. It was disgusting. Izuku had only now realized the seriousness of this situation. He wanted to puke, the sight before him was horrendous but he had to hold out. This was a murder situation and he had to stop her before anyone else got hurt. If he wanted to be a hero, he had to get used to these situations. He had to know how to deal with these situations because no matter how good people are, there are so many people who are way worse. Izuku covered his eyes and touched the man. Izuku presumed he didn't need to grab the man's face as he couldn't deny Izuku consent. Izuku felt the familiar rush of a quirk going into his body. The feeling however felt fat and refreshing. Izuku was confused at the feeling but couldn't delve deeper into it. He'd be on it all day trying to figure out his quirk when he can't even use it. Izuku looked up to the girl to see her stabbing the dead body again and liking the blood off of her knife. So her knife was obviously her weapon and use of attack. The body next to Izuku was covered in cut and stab wounds so if he can protect himself from that he should be fine. His heavy skeleton quirk should protect him, however if she has some type of speed quirk, there will be a problem. Izuku will become slower the more metal he creates on his body and if he can't defeat this girl fast enough. When he gets too tired, the metal slowly disappears back into Izuku's body and leave Izuku immobile. It's a bad drawback if Izuku can't defeat his opponent before that happens. But Izuku always has other quirks he can use like Bolt, Tentacles Hemomorphy and Constellation. They are all more complicated to use and Izuku still needed more practice. But in this situation, he has to try. Izuku puts his hood up and activates Heavy Skeleton. Iron grows on his body, covering parts of his shoulder, legs and ribs. He creates claws on his hands that act as a weapon he can defend himself. Izuku steps up and starts walking to the girl, alerting her of his presence. Izuku expected the girl to be shocked. Either become panicked that someone else had saw them or become eager to silence him. But the girl lit up like a Christmas tree. Izuku watched as her golden cat-like eyes locked onto him and seemed to glow in crazy happiness. Izuku stopped in his tracks as he watched this crazy girl stand up and start jumping with joy. "Ooh, a new friend. However, you're hiding your face from me. If we want to get to know each other, we have to be more honest with each other," the girl said in a sultry voice that made Izuku shiver. Izuku wasn't sure what was going on, but he didn't like it. The girl got down into a running stance before sprinting at Izuku with her knife ready to stab him. Izuku was surprised. This girl was fast, like crazy fast. Izuku barely had time to raise his arms in defense as she stabbed him. Her knife clanged with his metal bones. Izuku swung his claw at her, but she ducked with ease. Izuku felt something cut his ear. Suddenly he became aware that his hood had been hit off, giving the girl full view of his face. Izuku felt something wet slide down the side of his face, and Izuku noticed the girl's arm. It looked like she had just thrown something, but it couldn't have been her knife. It was still in her hand. Unless she has more. She definitely has more than one knife. The girl saw him before widening her eyes in excitement. She hopped back, which scared Izuku, and started hopping up and down excited. "Oh my god, you're so cute," she squealed, which both scared and confused Izuku. This girl was insane. She then smiled widely at Izuku, too widely. Izuku saw her fangs, and that's what clicked for Izuku. She needs BLD for her quirk. This girl was crazy fast, so her quirk probably increased her speed if she consumed BLD. Izuku had assumed she had a speed quirk because of the way she moved. It did confuse Izuku why there wasn't a clear activation notice. Most quirks have visual activations like their eyes glow or they have an aura of light. But she didn't have anything, which confused Izuku. It was possible she didn't have one, but that was very unlikely. For example, Izumi's body glows gold and the objects she manipulates have the same light of aura. 7. But since she has to consume BLD to activate her quirk, it makes more sense. Izuku has heard of a few facts about BLD quirks. Like they have to have fake BLD made to satisfy the thirst of wanting to drink some. Izuku wonders if others have stronger feelings to consuming BLD than others. Does this girl have a problem like that? "But you'd look cuter with a bit more red," the girl then stated, her eyes narrowing on Izuku dangerously. "Guess those thoughts will have to wait." Izuku quickly turned into her electric bolt and attacked the girl before she got to close. Unfortunately, electricity is unpredictable and he missed, slamming into the wall. Izuku growled and pushed himself off the wall. He then felt something sharp hit the back of his neck. Izuku gasped as he was pushed back into the wall. The pain was null from the knife entering a purple patch of skin. He felt the knife hit the spine in his neck. If it wasn't metal, Izuku would be in trouble. But luckily it was. Izuku activated his quirk and broke the knife with his bones. The girl then backed away, confused on what happened. Izuku didn't let this opportunity slide as he turned around and activated his quirk. A tentacle formed from his left and it shot out and grabbed the girl. She couldn't avoid it before being lifted into the air. The girl started to struggle. Izuku watched as she reached into her shoe and grabbed another knife and started stabbing the tentacle. Luckily, Izuku couldn't feel it. 11. Izuku used his right hand and reached for his face. His freckles started to glow. He threw out 8 balls of light. The girl slashed the tentacle and managed to release herself. She fell towards the ground but noticed small lights floating. She fell towards them, and when she was in between them all, they connected. The girl landed on a translucent golden barrier of light. She looked around frantically, her crazy smile vanished completely. The same barriers surrounded her completely. She started banging on them but nothing happened. She then stabbed them and got the same result. A sinking feeling registered in her chest. She was trapped. Caught. 2. Izuku sighed in relief as he sat down and put his hand over his heart. Even with 5 quirks, he still struggled to take her down. He really needs to get some practice in actually fighting. He knows he can't rely solely on quirks, but has never had the opportunity to get lessons before. Now, what to do about this girl? 1. Izuku looked up at the girl trapped in his constellation only to be met with a strange sight. She was crying. It was a complete 180 to what Izuku had seen before from the girl. Perhaps she was upset she was defeated, or was it something else? Izuku got up and walked towards her. The girl didn't look up at him. "Hey, why are you crying?" Izuku asked. The girl cracked a sad smile, and Izuku couldn't help but to feel bad. He hadn't even heard her response yet, and she had just killed people. What was he thinking? "It's over. I'm caught. I'll be put into jail for all of the stuff I've done," the girl said. She then started to cry harder. Izuku watched as the girl started to wail, curling herself into a ball. "I'm so sorry, so sorry. I never wanted to turn out like this," she sobbed, her head down in her arms. Izuku felt his heart crack. She doesn't have control of her actions. Izuku has read up a lot of cases, and he has seen several people forced into crime. Mainly from their quirk that alters their appearance and makes their needs different from others, like people with bug quirks. 14 Her quirk probably also got her ostracized as well. People are cruel, and her quirk probably required help from a quirk counselor, which she didn't get. Izuku knows he should call the police and arrest her. She killed 2 people. But Izuku can't help but feel that's the wrong choice. 2 It wasn't entirely her fault she killed those 2 people. If Izuku wants to help people, punishing others for something they can't control won't help anyone. Not to mention he has no way of contacting the police, and he is still kind of wanted by the police right now. Izuku sighs and puts his hand on the barrier. "Hey, you need BLD for your quirk, right?" Izuku asked. The girl stopped crying, only sniffling. She looked up at Izuku with sad and confused eyes. Her eyes were red and puffy with several streaks of tears down her cheek. Izuku couldn't help but feel sad at the sight he sees. Why yeah. "My quirk is called Transform," she said softly before lowering her head again. "I can turn into others if I consume their BLD," she said quietly. Izuku can hear her sobs again and feels sympathy for her. She was definitely self-conscious about her quirk. "If you want to borrow some BLD, I can spare you some," Izuku said with a kind smile. The girl looked up to him with eyes full of shock. Izuku couldn't help but think, cute, but knocked those thoughts away. "Wait, really?" she said, skeptical. Izuku nodded his head. "Yeah, just when I release you don't attack me," Izuku said, keeping eye contact and reaching over to a glowing ball of light. The girl nodded her head, looking like a lost kitten and desperately wants to be released. Izuku then pinched the light and destroyed. The barrier cracked like glass, making the girl fall to the ground just in front of Izuku. Izuku quickly helped her upright and made sure she wasn't hurt. The girl had brushed it off. Izuku then raised his arm up and pulled back his sleeve, revealing his mostly purple arm. 3 Okay, bite into here and take some BLD. "I don't mind," Izuku says. The girl, who looked distraught just before, just lit up brightly. She grabbed Izuku's arm and grabbed it eagerly. She then opened her mouth wide and bit down on Izuku's arm hungrily. Izuku barely felt a thing thanks to his quirk. They sat in silence for a couple minutes, the girl just hungrily sking on Izuku's BLD. Eventually she let go with a huge grin on her face, a small drip of BLD dripping down the side of her mouth. She looked at Izuku once more, except it had a lot less crazy and hunger in them than before. 2 So what's your name, String Bean? "My name is 𝗵𝗃𝗃. The girl asked, smiling like a cat. Izuku smiles before stopping himself. Would it be a good idea to tell her his name? What is she going to do? Call the police? She found Izuku Yagi while being a murderer. Izuku finds it unlikely that she'll care who he is and if he is also technically a criminal. He's already told 2 people his actual name. What's one more? "Izuku," he answered, not giving a last name. He wasn't a Yagi, never was. "Izukuin. It's such a cute name," she said happily, clapping her hands. Izuku was taken aback by her enthusiasm, but he kind of enjoyed it. But then she put a finger to her chin and looked at Izuku with a thinking face. "Wait, are you Izuku Yagi? Wasn't he quirkless?" she asked. Izuku gulped and looked down. 2 Yes, I am, and don't tell anyone I have a quirk. I'm going to be honest, I didn't even know I had it until I ran away," Izuku says. Himiko nodded her head understandingly. Izuku sighed and looked back over to her. He didn't want to ruin the moment, but he had to get back on topic. "So Toga," Izuku started. Himiko. We're friends now, Izuku-an, she smiled. Izuku blushed but put his thoughts away. So Himiko, he said, making the teen's smile bigger. Izuku looked down as he didn't want to see it disappear. Why did you do this? Izuku asked. He didn't need to be looking at her to know her smile dropped. He felt the tension rise immediately. Izuku looked up to see Himiko running her finger across the ground. It's villainous. My quirk is called transform, and if I consume another person's BLD I turn into them. I can't help myself. I crave BLD, Himiko said. Izuku knows he should probably comfort her, focusing on the last sentence, but his natural quirk geek mind went straight into action. He was a bit surprised she didn't have a speed quirk. She was incredibly fast, but it might be from training. Perhaps Izuku could ask for some tips. Whoa, that's so cool. Can you use the quirks of people you transform into? Is your limit for your quirk set at the same time or changes depending on how much BLD you've drunk? Izuku asked with stars in his eyes. Izuku looked taken aback, confused of what Izuku had just said. 15. Wait, you don't think it's villainous? Even after I killed those 2 people. And attacked you? She asked, her voice becoming quieter near the end. Izuku sighed and shook his head. What you did was villainous, but your quirk is not. You also have little control of your actions as your instinct make you crave BLD. It's just as normal as water and food for you, Izuku stated. Himiko looked at Izuku, astounded and touched by what he just said. She then gives a small smile. 2. Thank you, you're the first person to have ever been like that to me, she said. Izuku smiles and rubs the back of his head. No problem, Izuku smiled. Hey, I told you my quirk, it is your turn, Izuku-an. Himiko said, radiating happiness again. Izuku flinches before forcing himself to relax. Himiko won't judge him for his quirk, and it's not like she knows the story of All for One anyway. It's called All for One. It allows me to steal quirks for others and also give them away, Izuku said. Upon hearing this, Izuku jumps forward, pushing her hands onto Izuku's knees. Her face became incredibly close to Izuku's. Izuku quickly became red from embarrassment, especially at the close proximity he was with a girl. 1. So you can give me a quirk? Himiko asked excitedly. Izuku shoots his hands up in front of his face, trying to create an unneeded defense and put some distance between the two. I see, can't, it's dangerous. Besides, I'm still new to the Q quirk, Izuku stuttered. Himiko pouted but nodded her head nonetheless. She moved away from Izuku, still sitting close to him but now on her knees. But Izuku had just gotten an idea from his quirk. He's not sure if it will work, but it's worth a shot. Hey Himiko, can I try something? Izuku asked. Himiko instantly nodded her head. Of course, Izuku, you helped me and I want to help you, Himiko said. Izuku shrugged slightly as he raised his hand towards her. This isn't really helping me, Izuku said before touching Himiko. Izuku then felt the sensation of gaining a quirk. The quirk felt dry and needy but extremely flexible. Izuku decided to dive deeper into the quirk to see what it exactly was all about. He scanned around and found it was relatively a straightforward quirk. However, Izuku did find some concerning details. Specifically the emotions attached to the quirk. The first one was the need for BLD. It was a huge aspect of the quirk, concerningly huge. No wonder she went insane, she basically needed BLD all the time. The second one was when she activated her quirk. It was a random attribute, but when she alters her identity to someone else, if she knows how they act a bit, she can mimic their personality exactly. Definitely helpful for a quirk like this. But that now became a problem for Izuku. Why? Well, he had a theory. A non-active quirk he has called emotive deprive. The quirk that used to belong to Himaki. It makes it so that she couldn't feel any emotion whatsoever, which wasn't a quirk that anyone would want. But if Izuku combined it with Himiko's quirk, it would probably negate the emotional attachments her quirk has, effectively eliminating her need for BLD3, but in doing that would also destroy the bonus of being able to blend in as someone perfectly. Izuku didn't want that, so he looked deeper into the quirk and found something else interesting. There seems to be a strange limitation to Himiko's quirk. She can't use the person's quirk she has transformed into unless she has a strong emotional attachment to them. If Izuku got rid of that, she'd no longer have that limitation. Izuku weighed the pros and cons and ultimately deciding if 𝗵𝗃𝗀 will no longer be a villain anymore, the need to perfectly blend in is no longer necessary. So Izuku grabbed 𝗵𝗃𝗃 and forced the quirk into 𝗵𝗃𝗀's transform. The quirk combined and nothing really changed, only the emotional aspects of it destroyed. 𝗵𝗃𝗀 watched Izuku intently as he silently played with 3 different lights in his hands. She watched as he combined 2 of those lights together before putting the light inside of her. She felt her body, trying to figure out what had happened. She then started licking her lips before noticing something. She wasn't hungry. She stared over at Izuku as he opened his eyes. 𝗵𝗃𝗀 dashed over to him and embraced him tightly. "I'm not hungry anymore." "Thank you, thank you, thank you," she said, squeezing Izuku tightly. Izuku laughed and returned her hug. When 𝗵𝗃𝗀 eventually let go, she frowned and pointed at Izuku's waist. "Sorry," she said almost shamefully. Izuku raised an eyebrow before realizing what she meant. His clothes were now covered in blood. Izuku internally started to freak out. What was he going to do? These were the last good clothes he had and now were covered in blood. He couldn't buy more and it's not like he can just walk around with blood-soaked clothes. Wait, he has 𝗵𝗃𝗀. Why didn't he use it before? "Wait, I've got this," Izuku said. He then started to draw some blood. 𝗵𝗃𝗀 was concerned before he started forming his blood into clothes. He gave them both new pairs. Izuku put up a wall of tentacles to give themselves privacy as they changed into their new clothes. Izuku buttoned up before turning to 𝗵𝗃𝗀. "So 𝗵𝗃𝗀, where do you live?" Izuku asked. "Oh, on the street," 𝗵𝗃𝗀 replied casually. Izuku looked at her, concerned. He supposes it does make sense. That fact isn't really surprising, but it doesn't make it any less sad. "Oh, I have a place in a junkyard. You can come with me if you want," Izuku said. Why did he say that? Izuku doesn't want to be rude, but 𝗵𝗃𝗀 isn't really sane and not very intelligent. It wouldn't be a smart idea to bring someone else with those qualities to his hideout where he is trying not to be found by his ex-family so they don't kill them. 7 Really, I'd love to Izuku-kun. 𝗵𝗃𝗀 smiled widely. Of Izuku's doubts instantly vanished as soon as he saw her smile. Wonder why? 24 Izuku and 𝗵𝗃𝗀 then started to walk to Izuku's home. Home, Izuku thinks. He smiles at the thought. Home, it certainly is. What about those 2 dead bodies? Well, Izuku couldn't exactly call the police, so he'll let someone else do that. But he took the other person's quirk before leaving. What? It's not like they'll use it. 14 Izuku and 𝗵𝗃𝗀 made it to 𝗧𝗪𝗏 beach and walked around all of the garbage until they made it to the caravan. Izuku walked up to it and was about to open the door until he felt a small tug on his shirt. Izuku turns around to see 𝗵𝗃𝗀 looking at him with a pout. Izuku-kun, you've helped me so much today in such a short period of time. Is there anything I can do to help you, please? 𝗵𝗃𝗀 said, looking at Izuku pleadingly. Izuku had to look away as he felt his cheeks turn hot. He started to think if there was something she can do before an idea popped into his head. Actually you can. I noticed you were really good at fighting, could you teach me? Izuku asks. 𝗵𝗃𝗀 smiles widely. Of course, she yelled happily. Izuku smiled as well, feeling incredibly happy. It was strange. Izuku was always wishing he had a cool quirk like his friends or sister his entire life, but now, in a moment like this, Izuku is kind of glad he never found out he had all for one. It felt right. Doc, Aizawa, and 𝗵𝗃𝗀 all sat in Doc's office. Doc had sent the person who she gave the powerful painkillers to. He had agreed to come and now they were just waiting. Doc was apprehensive because she knew the man. She had told the other 2 he had a horrible past and is prone to violent outbursts if something triggers memories from his past. Also the fact that he despises heroes with a burning passion made her concerned that Aizawa should leave, but he insisted on staying along with 𝗵𝗃𝗀. Heavy knocks radiate from the door. Doc instantly stands up and walks towards it. 𝗵𝗃𝗀 and Aizawa stay where they are and watch her as they open the door. When it opens they don't see anyone, but it was because there were 3 steps to the door. The man was currently at the bottom. A deep and raspy voice then spoke. "Hey Doc, you need something?" the man asked, his tone seemed tired. Doc nodded and looked back at Aizawa. He didn't waver and held her worried gaze. She sighed and looked down again. "𝗬𝗲𝗏, you've heard that a boy named Izuku Yagi went missing," she said. 15. What about it? 𝗬𝗲𝗏 says in a dry voice. "Well, it was found that he had powerful painkillers in his room. You're the only person that I give those to, so a hero and a detective want to know." Doc didn't get to finish her sentence as heavy footsteps slammed up the steps. 𝗧𝗵𝗲 flinched while Aizawa didn't waver. A hand pushed Doc out of a way and a man walked into the room. He had shaggy black hair that was too dark to be natural. He had icy turquoise eyes and wearing a lot of black clothing. A large biker's jacket with a plain white shirt underneath it. Generic black breathes and combat boots. But that wasn't what caught the detective and Aizawa's eye. He had several patches of burned purple skin that was connected to his healthy skin by staples. He glared at the two with hatred and intensity. 𝗧𝗵𝗲 had to admit, he was slightly scared. If it wasn't for Aizawa next to him and knowing this guy didn't have a mutant quirk from his appearance, he perhaps would have cessed himself. But unexpectedly, his heated gaze stopped and the man sighed. He then put his hands in his jacket's pockets. I thought it was someone else," 𝗬𝗏𝗏 said before walking to a wall and leaning up against it, no longer as hostile as he was before. "Oh, are you fine with 𝗧𝗧𝗔𝗍, 𝗬𝗏𝗏?" Doc said. 𝗬𝗏𝗏 scoffs and rolls his eyes. "I don't have a problem with 𝗧𝗧𝗔𝗍. I presumed All Might would have been here," 𝗬𝗏𝗏 said. Doc looked at 𝗬𝗏𝗏 confused while 𝗧𝗵𝗲 and Aizawa's eyes widen. 𝗬𝗏𝗏 looks over them and smirks at their reaction. "What's wrong? That's why I'm here, isn't it?" "Izuku Yagi," 𝗬𝗏𝗏 says, smirking at the two. 𝗧𝗵𝗲𝗏 narrows his eyes. "How do you know?" 𝗧𝗵𝗲𝗏 says, but 𝗬𝗏𝗏 was interrupted. And what makes you think I'll tell you?" 𝗬𝗏𝗏 snarks. 𝗧𝗵𝗲𝗏 flinches back at the man's sudden mood change. Aizawa glares at 𝗬𝗏𝗏 and puts his hand on his capture weapon. 𝗬𝗏𝗏, did you or did you not give Izuku Yagi your painkillers?" Aizawa asks threateningly. 𝗬𝗏𝗏's mood instantly changes again as he smirks and shrugs his shoulders. "Yes," 𝗬𝗏𝗏 answers. This shocks Aizawa as he didn't expect an honest answer. 𝗧𝗵𝗲𝗏 then elbows Aizawa and looks at him sternly. 𝗧𝗵𝗲𝗏's quirk doesn't work if he wasn't the one to ask the question. Doc then walks over to 𝗬𝗏𝗏 and frowns at him. "Wait, 𝗬𝗏𝗏, why the hell would you do that?" "I know you and you aren't that type of person," Doc said with crossed arms. 𝗬𝗏𝗏 chuckles and looks over to her, giving one last glance to the detective and hero. "Do you remember the scrawny bush-head kid I brought in 2 years ago?" 𝗬𝗏𝗏 asks. Doc's eyes widened. "Wait, was that Izuku Yagi?" Doc asked, covering her mouth with her hand. 𝗬𝗏𝗏 smirked and nodded his head. "Hold on, what was this about Izuku?" 𝗧𝗵𝗲𝗏 asked, gaining the two's attention. Doc nods her head and readjusts her glasses. "Well, 2 years ago, 𝗬𝗏𝗏 brought a kid in who was basically on death's door. He was bleeding profusely and had severe burns and freezer burns. Not only that, he had 2 fractured ribs and 2 ribs that were indented. Which means they have been broken before and healed incorrectly," Doc said. 𝗧𝗵𝗲𝗏 cringed at the mental image it gave him while Aizawa scowled. If 𝗬𝗏𝗏 didn't bring him here, he would have died. But when he woke up, he booked it out of here claiming he'd be late for school. "I just didn't have the tools to track him down," Doc said. Wait, then how did he end up with those painkillers, 𝗬𝗏𝗏?" Aizawa asked. 𝗬𝗏𝗏 gave him a deadpan look. "The same way I knew his name was Izuku 𝗬𝗏𝗏. I know who he is and he kind of knows who I am," 𝗬𝗏𝗏 said. 𝗧𝗵𝗲𝗏 looks between the two as they glare at each other. 𝗧𝗵𝗲𝗏 looks over to Doc, who raises her hands up with confusion. 𝗧𝗵𝗲𝗏 sighs and stands up. "All right, 𝗬𝗏𝗏, it is clear you need to come to the station with me and 𝗧𝗧𝗔𝗍. It is clear that you have information that you shouldn't and that your name isn't 𝗬𝗏𝗏," 𝗧𝗵𝗲𝗏, trying to fake confidence because low-key, he was scared of his man. 𝗬𝗏𝗏 scoffs at the mention of his name being fake. "How about this detective?" 𝗬𝗏𝗏 starts, looking at 𝗧𝗵𝗲𝗏 threateningly, making him gulp. "You give me 2 weeks, then I'll willing walk down to the station and answer all of your questions," 𝗬𝗏𝗏 says. 𝗧𝗵𝗲𝗏 was about to decline when Aizawa spoke. "Sure, he said in a tired voice. 𝗬𝗓𝗵𝗃 choked on air and turned to him. He was looking at Darby with a neutral expression while he was smirking. What? No, I didn't agree, he states. In the end he didn't have a choice. Izuku had no idea what he had gotten himself into. It seemed like bringing Himiko to his home was a good idea at the time. She was no longer hostile with her thirst for hunger removed, but that didn't change the fact that she was. Well, how is a nice way to put this? Not normal. 3. She has childlike curiosity despite Izuku being sure she was older than him. Not much, but she definitely wasn't younger. Izuku has a large amount of curiosity himself, but that is also due to the fact his parents never took him anywhere. The same can probably be said for Himiko, but it's different. She's dainty and carefree, fitting the stereotype of dumb blonde. For someone that is a murderer, she certainly doesn't fit the bill Izuku had thought of for those types of people. But he has noticed that when she walks, it's silent. Izuku hasn't even known her for a full day and he constantly finds her missing. Then the next second, she pops out of a pile of garbage. Hey Izuku, could you make a TV? Himiko asked, current sprawled out on the small kitchen counter Izuku has. Izuku stops what he was doing and looks over to her questioningly. How would I do that? Izuku asks. Himiko giggles at him. With your quirk, silly. You made us clothes before, surely you can make a TV, Himiko explained. Izuku hadn't thought of that. Even though, theoretically he could, there was this whole problem of knowing how to make it. Not only that, he'd have to learn how to code, which he did not know. But that didn't mean he didn't have an idea. No, I'd have to know how to make a TV. But, that just gave me an idea, Izuku said. Himiko looked thoughtfully at him as Izuku got up and went over to the kitchen. He opened a cabinet and grabbed out a bowl. With his nails, Izuku made a cut in his other hand and spilled some BLD. He put his hand over the bowl and let his BLD drip into it. But Izuku had his BLD turn into potato chips. Himiko's eyes sparkled as she looked into the bowl. 10 Wow! You're an infinite food bank, she exclaimed. Izuku chuckled at her excitement. Not exactly, I still have to harm myself to use this quirk at all and I don't regenerate my BLD. But this quirk will be very useful for the future, Izuku said happily. He raised his hand up and to stop his BLD from dripping into the bowl and made the rest of the BLD on his hand become a bandage, covering the wound. 21. Izuku and Himiko then shared the potato chips. Izuku spent most of the time showing Himiko around the caravan. She asked a surprising amount of questions and Izuku was kind of concerned with how little she knew. But eventually they had to go to bed. There was only 2 beds, one was on the floor while the other was connected to the wall. Izuku being the nice boy he was volunteered for the floor which Himiko was fine with. He gave her a blanket and his pillow as he didn't have a spare, but he did have his sleeping bag so Izuku was still happy. So Izuku, about me teaching you how to fight. I really don't know how to. I'm more good at avoiding and such. Using my small stature to get around fast and stuff. I've only really been effective at what I do because of my knife, Himiko said. Izuku turned over to her and looked at her. She looked sheepish and sad which Izuku found strange. That's fine. When we, fought, I presumed your quirk made you faster if you consumed BLD. I was convinced you had a speed quirk. So, could you maybe teach me evasion tactics? Izuku asked. At those words, Izuku watched as Himiko brightened up to match the sun causing Izuku to blush. What did he say to make her do that? 8 Of course, I can definitely do that, she said happily. Night Izuku-an, she said instantly. Izuku stared at her, stunned. She changed in an instant. Izuku then heard light snoring before realizing she was already asleep. How the hell did she do that? 11 Izuku shook his head in disbelief before turning around. She was crazy. Why wasn't he more concerned? 2 Izuku and Himiko both stand to each other in an open area in 𝗧𝗪𝗏 Beach. Himiko was bouncing up and down on her toes with a large smile. Izuku was slightly nervous. He was never really good at exercise or PE in school. Running was the only good thing he was really good at. Which is how he ended up in this situation. Running away from his problems. 4 So the first thing to do while trying to parkour or getting better at evading is getting back up. You'll fail way more than you'll succeed when you start. So learning how to roll is the first step, so follow my lead. Himiko said. She then demonstrated a roll and hopped back up with elegance. Izuku had to be honest, he had no clue what to do, but practice makes perfect, right? Izuku got down and tried to roll but found some difficulty. He starts to slow down before his feet had hit the ground again. Izuku's feet slammed onto the ground and he flung himself onto his feet again. Izuku had done it too hard and ended up stumbling back, which caused Himiko to laugh. You're a bit clunky there, Izuku, Himiko said with a giggle. Izuku blushes but rolls his eyes. Hey, I have metal bones, cut me some slack, Izuku whines. Izuku and Himiko then started to practice more on evasion skills. Izuku being the fast learner, he was picked several skills up extremely fast, despite his iron bones. By then and Izuku breathed on the ground while Himiko sat on top of a broken car giggling at him. Izuku turns some of his BLD into a water and fills a water bottle and starts to drink it. 10. Are you that tired, Izuku? Himiko teases. Izuku groans and nods his head. They had been training for the past 5 hours and Himiko had maintained her high energy and charisma the entire time. Himiko is a whole new entity that Izuku had to figure out. There had been a question plaguing his mind since he had fixed Himiko's quirk. Hey Himiko, Izuku said, catching Himiko's attention. Yes, Izuku. Himiko asked. Izuku took a deep breath. He didn't want to upset Himiko, they had just met and were getting along well. Izuku didn't want to ruin it by being insensitive to her privacy, but Izuku felt like it was important to know at least a bit about her. So, how long have you been on the streets? Izuku asked, worried about her reaction. To his surprise, however, she just looked thoughtful. Himiko then looked down at her hands and started counting her fingers. She was mumbling softly to herself as she tried to come up with an answer. It would be 4 years. Himiko yelled, too happy. Izuku's eyes widened in shock. Wait, how old are you? Izuku asked. 14, I think. Not sure, but I do know it was the last day of middle school, Himiko said. Izuku was in shock. She has been on the street and probably killing people since she was 10. Izuku knew her thirst was bad, but geez. Was she deprived of it? Probably, she would have been given fake BLD to help if she had gone to a quirk counselor. 9. Her parents were probably embarrassed or horrified about her quirk. Probably tried to suppress it and desperately have them not to use it. Izuku's parents probably would have him not reveal that he was quirkless if they had remembered he existed after the diagnosis. How were you treated? Izuku asked. Himiko smiled, but Izuku could tell it was forced. She looked down and started kicking the air with her feet. My parents didn't like my quirk. I wanted BLD, but they didn't like that. Always wanting me to be normal and not wanting anyone to know that I had a disgusting quirk that would ruin the family name, she said. You had a rich family, people whose value is entirely based on quirks, Izuku said. Himiko nodded her head. She then swung her head back and took a huge breath. When she looked back at Izuku, he could see her wide toothy smile back on her face. All right, Izuku, your turn, she said happily. Izuku froze. What? Izuku said, suddenly becoming very scared. Himiko, picking this up, hopped down from the car and quickly hopped over to Izuku, waving her hands sporadically. No, you don't have to, Izuku. I told you a bit about myself, so I thought it was only fair if you did as well, Himiko said. Izuku started to shake slightly. He nodded his head, understanding her logic. It would only be fair. I guess it's fair, Izuku stuttered. He hadn't told anyone about his life yet. Not Himaki, not Akito, not anyone. It was something that no one should have dealt with. Izuku is aware that he hasn't had the worst experience from kids, his bet that other quirkless children have had it worse. But it doesn't mean he's comfortable with telling others or that his experience throughout his past 9 years were nothing short of a living hell. For he has felt like trash the past 9 years of his life. Worthless, useless, pathetic, mistake, Deku. All those times, all of those people. It confuses Izuku of why he didn't just end himself. It would have made his life so much easier, no more pain, no more misery. He wouldn't have to look over his shoulder every second out of fear of having something thrown at him or one of his perpetrators coming to attack. Now look what he's gotten himself into. He's taken people's quirks and his parents know about it. To Izuku, he heard Himiko yelled. Damn it, maybe he should have found a building to jump of instead of butting his nose into unwanted business. Izuku looked over to Himiko to find her very close. Their noses were almost touching. Izuku then realized that she had her hand touching his cheek softly. Izuku completely froze, his body no longer became responsive to the actions he is trying to make. He had shut down. Izuku, you don't need to tell me anything you're not ready yet. It can wait, you don't need to do anything you don't want to for my sake. If you need to wait, then wait. I'll be ready whenever you are, she said softly. Izuku could only nod his head dumbly. She was too close, and she was touching him. Izuku didn't know what to do. Why yeah, thanks hi Himiko, Izuku stuttered, currently in a complete state of shock. Himiko smiled widely. Izuku could feel his face burning again. If you want you can just tell me about your quirk, you like quirks right and yours is super cool. Himiko said. Izuku looked down, and put on a fake smile. Yeah, I can take and give quirks. Although there is a limit on the quirks I can use at the moment. I currently have 3 unusable quirks and I have access to 5 at the moment, Izuku said. Himiko nodded but she had a frown. Izuku looked up at her questioningly. She sighed and looked at Izuku seriously. Something's upset you Izuku-san. You don't have to do things for my sake, she said, shaking his shoulders slightly. Izuku put his hands on her shoulders to stop Himiko from shaking him. Okay, It's just that I've only had this quirk for almost 2 weeks, Izuku admitted. Himiko looked confused, putting a finger on her chin. What do you mean, she asked. Izuku chuckled awkwardly and rubs the back of his neck, looking away. Well, it's more that I never realized I had it. I was diagnosed quirkless and just didn't know I had this quirk until recently, Izuku said. Himiko's eyes widened. Wait, so you were essentially quirkless? Himiko said. Izuku nodded his head, looking at the ground. He then yelped as Izuku was pulled forward. Izuku then felt arms wrap around him and squeeze him tightly. I'm so sorry, he heard Himiko say. Izuku didn't know what to say. He wasn't all too familiar what was going on either. Slowly, Izuku moved his arms and wrapped them around Himiko, pulling her closer. Izuku wasn't all too familiar with affection of any kind, but he liked it. Izuku and Himiko continued to practice evasion tactics throughout the week. Izuku had gotten pretty good but he still wasn't nowhere near as good as Himiko. Especially at stealth. But Izuku had noticed he had gained a lot more muscle than what he had before. His iron bones must be helping with that. Pulling the extra weight along all of the time. Izuku had also increased his limit for quirks from 5 to 7. So now he can use 2 out of his 3 locked quirks. Energy Spear, Fat Inflammation, and Pitch. Izuku hadn't actually spent too much time worrying those 2 new quirks he received from when he found Himiko. In all honesty, he has been trying to avoid that memory. Thinking about 2 dead bodies and how he is currently living with an ex-murderer isn't something he'd want to worry about. Fat Inflammation was a regeneration quirk. It healed him almost instantly but he'd have to exchange fat cells to do it. So theoretically, he can stop himself from dying. It will also help with his other quirk 𝗵𝗃. So that choice was an obvious one. With that and the help of the library, Izuku has made a mini fridge, an electrical generator with solar panels he found in the surrounding junk. Now Izuku was worrying about getting a phone and internet. But Izuku still kind of needed a job. The singer at Himaki's cafe was still open but he didn't know how to sing. But maybe he didn't have to. Pitch allowed him to manipulate the sound of his own voice. If he can learn the lyrics of songs, all he'd have to do was sing them and let his quirk do the rest. So he chose that quirk over Energy Spear. Don't get Izuku wrong, he knew it was a strong quirk but he also had other quirks he can use so it wasn't a big loss. Izuku also had told Himiko about his old family. Keeping out the details of One for All but telling her that All Might was his father. Saying that she was angry was an understatement. Izuku guessed that kind of reaction. Izuku knew Himiko was also a very touchy and social person who needed to be around others, but after he told her his story, she wouldn't leave him be. Not that Izuku really thought it was a bad thing. He kind of liked having her around. It was nice knowing someone cared. 6. Izuku was currently outside of the caravan, practicing with his constellation quirk. It was a lot more complicated than what Izuku had thought. It works based off of his freckles, so technically if someone had no freckles but had this quirk, would they be quirkless or would their quirk have developed differently? It was so fascinating. Himiko soon walked out of the caravan, skiing on an ice block. "Hey Izuku-kun, I've got a question," Himiko said. Izuku turned around and smiled at her. "All right Himi, shoot," he said. "Why are you trying to learn how to fight?" "I mean, you wouldn't be allowed to go to a hero school," Himiko said thoughtfully. Izuku chuckled and nodded his head. "Not a legal one," Izuku said. Himiko looked at him confused, telling Izuku he needed to explain it more. Most heroes nowadays want the fame and publicity that comes with it. Most are one-trick ponies and won't try anything that might ruin their reputation. That's not how heroes should be. They should save everyone while putting themselves at risk. Obviously not suicidal, but they shouldn't value their lives above everyone else's. This society has become so quirk-dependent that depending on what type of quirk you have dictates your entire future as a working society member or a nobody. I can't stand for that. I'll be a better hero than my parents and help the people the heroes shove to the side. I'll be vigilante, hope, Izuku acknowledged. 7. At the end of Izuku's entire speech, Himiko had stars in her eyes. She then ran up to Izuku and started bouncing up and down. "Can I come too? I can help you," Himiko said. Izuku blinked. He wanted to refuse, but the logical part of him knew that he shouldn't. She'd be devastated if he said no, and he didn't want to make her upset. Izuku also knew that she would be fine. She was a lot better at fighting than he was. But if she got hurt, Izuku wouldn't be able to forgive himself. But the earnest shine in her eyes shone right through Izuku's soul. Sighing, Izuku came up with an idea that would hopefully work. "All right, but on one condition," Izuku stated. Himiko brightened up, forcing Izuku to look away. "Too bright. I'll give you a quirk," Izuku said. This made Himiko stop. "She," said, shaking his shoulders slightly. Izuku put his hands on her shoulders to stop Himiko from shaking him. "Okay, it's just that I've only had this quirk for almost 2 weeks," Izuku admitted. Himiko looked confused, putting a finger on her chin. "What do you mean?" she asked. Izuku chuckled awkwardly and rubs the back of his neck, looking away. "Well, it's more that I never realized I had it. I was diagnosed quirkless and just didn't know I had this quirk until recently," Izuku said. Himiko's eyes widened. "Wait, so you were essentially quirkless?" Himiko said. Izuku nodded his head, looking at the ground. He then yelped as Izuku was pulled forward. Izuku then felt arms wrap around him and squeeze him tightly. "I'm so sorry," he heard Himiko say. Izuku didn't know what to say. He wasn't all too familiar what was going on either. Slowly, Izuku moved his arms and wrapped them around Himiko, pulling her closer. Izuku wasn't all too familiar with affection of any kind, but he liked it. Izuku and Himiko continued to practice evasion tactics throughout the week. Izuku had gotten pretty good, but he still wasn't nowhere near as good as Himiko, especially at stealth. But Izuku had noticed he had gained a lot more muscle than what he had before. His iron bones must be helping with that, pulling the extra weight along all of the time. 4. Izuku had also increased his limit for quirks from 5 to 7. So now he can use 2 out of his 3 locked quirks: Energy Spear, Fat Inflammation, and Pitch. Izuku hadn't actually spent too much time worrying those 2 new quirks he received from when he found Himiko. In all honesty, he has been trying to avoid that memory. Thinking about 2 dead bodies and how he is currently living with an ex-murderer isn't something he'd want to worry about. Fat Inflammation was a regeneration quirk. It healed him almost instantly, but he'd have to exchange fat cells to do it. So theoretically, he can stop himself from dying. It will also help with his other quirk 𝗵𝗃. So that choice was an obvious one. With that and the help of the library, Izuku has made a mini fridge, an electrical generator with solar panels he found in the surrounding junk. Now Izuku was worrying about getting a phone and internet. 6 But Izuku still kind of needed a job. The singer at 𝗵𝗃𝗲 cafe was still open but he didn't know how to sing. But maybe he didn't have to. Pitch allowed him to manipulate the sound of his own voice. If he can learn the lyrics of songs, all he'd have to do was sing them and let his quirk do the rest. So he chose that quirk over energy spear. Don't get Izuku wrong, he knew it was a strong quirk but he also had other quirks he can use so it wasn't a big loss. Izuku also had told 𝗵𝗃𝗄 about his old family. Keeping out the details of one for all but telling her that All Might was his father. Saying that she was angry was an understatement. Izuku guessed that kind of reaction. Izuku knew 𝗵𝗃𝗄 was also a very touchy and social person who needed to be around others, but after he told her his story, she wouldn't leave him be. Not that Izuku really thought it was a bad thing. He kind of liked having her around. It was nice knowing someone cared. 6 Izuku was currently outside of the caravan, practicing with his constellation quirk. It was a lot more complicated than what Izuku had thought. It works based off of his freckles, so technically if someone had no freckles but had this quirk, would they be quirkless or would their quirk have developed differently? It was so fascinating. 𝗵𝗃𝗄 soon walked out of the caravan, skiing on an ice block. Hey Izuku-kun, I've got a question, 𝗵𝗃𝗄 said. Izuku turned around and smiled at her. All right 𝗵𝗃𝗄, shoot, he said. Why are you trying to learn how to fight? I mean, you wouldn't be allowed to go to a hero school, 𝗵𝗃𝗄 said thoughtfully. Izuku chuckled and nodded his head. Not a legal one, Izuku said. 𝗵𝗃𝗄 looked at him confused, telling Izuku he needed to explain it more. Most heroes nowadays want the fame and publicity that comes with it. Most are one-trick ponies and won't try anything that might ruin their reputation. That's not how heroes should be. They should save everyone while putting themselves at risk. Obviously not suicidal, but they shouldn't value their lives above everyone else's. This society has become so quirk-dependent that depending on what type of quirk you have dictates your entire future as a working society member or a nobody. I can't stand for that. I'll be a better hero than my parents and help the people the heroes shove to the side. I'll be vigilante, hope, Izuku acknowledged. 7 At the end of Izuku's entire speech, 𝗵𝗃𝗄 had stars in her eyes. She then ran up to Izuku and started bouncing up and down. Can I come too? I can help you, 𝗵𝗃𝗄 said. Izuku blinked. He wanted to refuse but the logical part of him knew that he shouldn't. She'd be devastated if he said no and he didn't want to make her upset. Izuku also knew that she would be fine, she was a lot better at fighting than he was. But if she got hurt, Izuku wouldn't be able to forgive himself. But the earnest shine in her eyes shone right through Izuku's soul. Sighing, Izuku came up with an idea that would hopefully work. All right, but on one condition, Izuku stated. 𝗵𝗃𝗄 brightened up, forcing Izuku to look away. Too bright. I'll give you a quirk, Izuku said. This made 𝗵𝗃𝗄 stop. She stopped bouncing and looked at Izuku confused. Wait, didn't you say that was dangerous, she said. Well yes, however my 𝗵𝗃𝗄 quirk is similar enough to yours that it should be fine. And if it's not, I can always take it back, Izuku said. At his answer, 𝗵𝗃𝗄 smiled and nodded her head excitedly. She stretched her hand out to Izuku. 6 All right, work your magic Izuku, she said. Izuku laughed and grabbed her hand. He then activated his quirk. He grabbed his 𝗵𝗃𝗄 quirk and put it inside 𝗵𝗃𝗄. He waited for the bit as he watched 𝗵𝗃𝗄's transform quirk and 𝗵𝗃𝗄 quirk act with each other. At first they started to attack each other. It wasn't anything strong so Izuku let it go for a moment before it stopped. The quirks just. With her original quirk being nowhere found. She was attacked by the person whose quirk she now possessed so she isn't in trouble. All she has to do is tell 𝗵𝗃𝗄 who the person was that gave her a quirk. But she was being incredibly difficult. Miss Gotsu, I don't think you understand the situation right now. You have to tell me who gave you that quirk, 𝗵𝗃𝗄 said exasperatedly, getting very frustrated by the girl. 𝗵𝗃𝗄 glared at 𝗵𝗃𝗄 in response. And I told you, over my dead body. Why the hell do you think I would tell you that? 𝗵𝗃𝗄 asked. Because they are breaking the law, 𝗵𝗃𝗄 answered. 𝗵𝗃𝗄 scoffed and leaned forward over the table, getting closer to 𝗵𝗃𝗄. All right 𝗧𝗵𝗃𝗄, I want you to listen to me. My entire life, I have told that I was a mistake. That I was worthless and had no future because of my SHT quirk. I was told that by my peers, parents, and even Fing heroes. But this kid was the first person to respect me as a human being. Despite my quirk, he treated me with respect. They then helped me, the first person to have ever helped me my entire life. They are more of a hero than what any hero could ever be. You wouldn't understand as your quirk practically landed you this job. So if you think I'm going to sell out the one person who has ever respected me to people who have only treated me like SHT, you're delusional. The girl laughed angrily. 𝗍𝗪𝗧𝗏 frowned. 15, they are probably using you, 𝗍𝗪𝗧𝗏 countered. 𝗵𝗃𝗃 shrugged and gave 𝗍𝗪𝗧𝗏 a tired look. I know they aren't idiot, but even if they were, I wouldn't care. I would rather be a pawn to them than be a punching bag for the people with heroic quirks. Now if you have nothing more to say, I want to go home, 𝗵𝗃𝗃 said sternly. 𝗍𝗪𝗧𝗏 groaned and covered his face with his hand. He had to find all for one's successor fast. He knows that whoever he is isn't planning anything good. He is going to brainwash the people who have nothing left and need any form of love or appreciation of any kind. They are the easiest targets, and 𝗍𝗪𝗧𝗏 needs to stop them. Izuku and Himiko stood outside their caravan. It was home at this point. Izuku at least thought it was home. He didn't know too much about Himiko, but how she acts, Izuku guessed she called it home too. Izuku had gotten Himiko to practice with hemomorphy for the past 2 days, which Himiko complained was unnecessary. The logical side of Izuku knew he was being unreasonable. Himiko was just going to create knives with her quirk anyway. But he didn't want her getting hurt or hurting herself to give herself more BLD for power. Despite her protest, Izuku had to make sure she had the basics of the quirks down. He had taken the quirk back momentarily so he can make each of them a costume. He made himself his, which was a black and white hoodie with the word hope in bold over his chest in a dark green color. He gave himself matching breathes and made himself a mask. When he said make, he already had one prepared. He had found an old mask that looked like a metal hockey mask with an evil toothy grin. Izuku liked it and adjusted to not make it look as old. 9. He was also going to make Himiko's costume, but she insisted that she could do it. Izuku, despite trying to tell her she needed to know what material to use and how to make it. Himiko pouted and crossed her arms at him. However, Izuku sighed and relented at her immediately. Definitely a weakness he'll have to fix in the future. 2. As Izuku expected, Himiko failed miserably while making her costume. But she insisted that she just needed a second go. Izuku, sighing at her cute antics, and kept her have a second go. Only for her to go above and beyond his expectations. Himiko's costume was black and deep red. She wore black leather over her entire body and only a small mask. Izuku felt his nose starting to bleed at how tight her clothes were. He quickly took back the quirk and made her a costume. 12. Himiko was sad about it but took it nonetheless. It was still similar to what she had before, only a red covering over her nose and mouth, red breathes, and a sleeveless hood with a small red tie. Despite Himiko loving it, she still wanted to wear the costume she made. Izuku quickly denied her though, saying it wasn't warm enough for night and didn't do good enough at hiding her identity. It's totally not because he got a weird feeling when she wore the second one. It hadn't confused Izuku at all, he was just disappointed with what she made. Yep, definitely no other emotion. 9. So are we ready to go? Himiko said happily, flipping 3 knives in a single hand. Izuku looked at them nervously, just waiting for Himiko to accidentally cut herself. No, we still need to give you a name, Izuku said. Himiko looked over to Izuku thoughtfully. Which scared the hell out of Izuku as she continued to juggle the 3 knives with one hand while not looking. Toga is fine, Izuku chuckled nervously, glancing at Himiko's eyes to her knife. And no, that won't work. Why, you are still classified as a murderer, so you need a different name, Izuku said. Himiko looked down at the mention of her as a murderer. But Izuku sprung forward and quickly snatched her knives. Himiko looked back at him with wide eyes and pouted. Hey, she whined. Izuku smiled sheepishly at her and rubbed the back of his head. Sorry, but you were scaring me with your juggling. But your name could be 𝗵𝗃𝗃, Izuku said. Himiko's blank look to Izuku, he had to elaborate. 𝗬𝗪𝗂𝗁𝗲 is the most famous female vampires in legends and was still incredibly powerful. Even being acknowledged by Dracula, Izuku said. Himiko seemed to brighten at those words and ran forward and hugged him. I love it, Izuku-san. It matches us perfectly. I'm Carmilla and you're Dracula. Himiko beamed up at him. Izuku could feel his face grow hot at their proximity but nod with a shaky smile. Izuku didn't have the heart to tell her that he just very heavily elaborated Carmilla. But it's probably for the best. 22 Izuku and Himiko had finally gone out to the city. Izuku hadn't made a route for them yet. He had to look around the city to gauge good areas to scout out and be on the lookout for. Izuku had also had the thought of having him and Himiko split up, but a gut instinct told him it wouldn't be a good idea to let an ex-murderer run around with a knife. Don't get him wrong, he trusted Himiko. But that doesn't change the fact she still isn't mentally stable. Much like himself. 2 Izuku and Himiko had gone to running across the rooftops and Izuku had quickly found out that Himiko was insanely fast. He already knew Himiko was quick, he had thought she had a speed quirk. But as they were jumping from roof to roof, he was struggling to keep up. Izuku didn't exactly have an excuse for himself either. Despite having his bones being iron, which obviously made Izuku incredibly heavy for his size, Izuku no longer had much issue with his quirk anymore. He had increased the power in his leg joints by creating stronger joints in them with his quirk to make him move faster, allowing him more agility and turn at the flip of the dime. But he still didn't hold a candle to Himiko. She was doing tricks, flipping through the air and landing on the other roof with a handstand. The only reason Izuku hadn't lost her yet was because of his quirk bolt. Somehow, Himiko was oblivious to how much dust Izuku was eating from her. She did only have that transformation quirk, didn't she? 1 Izuku smiled at that fact. If she were to have not been ostracized and got the help she needed, perhaps she'd have become a hero. Probably an underground one because her quirk would be best suited for it. But when she needed to fight, Izuku chuckles to himself as whoever they were tried to scramble away as Himiko suddenly appeared behind them. He then stopped. Himiko did too. Izuku swears he heard a scream, and judging by how Himiko is also on alert and looking around, she did as well. However, nothing seemed to be going on. The night was dark and peaceful, only the lack of breeze making the night feel kind of warm. Izuku turned to Himiko and opened his mouth to speak, but a scream stopped him. "Let's go," Izuku said, his expression hard and serious as he turned into an electric bolt and zoomed away. Himiko had also become serious as she chased after him. The scream had been quite loud, although if Izuku and Himiko weren't adept from listening to small sounds they wouldn't have heard it from that far away. Izuku crashed into the side of a roof but quickly recovered. He felt his bones bend at the sheer force of the impact, but Izuku quickly sets his bones back into place. That bone manipulation quirk had been a blessing as he had quite weak ribs from the fact that they had been broken several times. 13 Izuku pushes himself up and continues to run across the rooftops. "Better keep your mouth shut or I'll punch your butt to the moon," he heard a voice say. Izuku scowled at the words but kept quiet. He looked down the alley where it was taking place. There were 4 people in there. 3 were male and 1 was female. 1 male was on the ground and another man held the woman, an arm around her neck. He couldn't identify a quirk from any of those 3, but he could from the last male. Izuku wasn't sure if it was a mutant or part of his quirk, but the man was surrounded with something. Izuku wasn't sure what it was, but it seemed to cover the man like an aura, but it had a clear gleam to the faint light on the street, meaning it was reflective and most likely a solid. Maybe metal like mercury. Izuku also noticed the man holding the woman was significantly shorty and not very well built in muscle. He was super lean and bony. The girl was a lot bigger than him and could probably take him on easily. Except he was the one who said they'd punch their butt to the moon. Looking at the alleyway, Izuku did notice a large garbage bin dented inwards and now unusable across the alleyway. So he had some sort of strength quirk, but what was the other guy's quirk? The man with the strength quirk had obviously not taken out the man who was unconscious, as he wasn't that injured nor near broken like the bin. It could be that his quirk doesn't work on people, but that still means either the girl or the other man took them out. Izuku's eyes snapped to the side as he feels another presence. He sighs in relief when he saw it was only Himiko. He then turned his attention back to what was happening. The shorter male was touching the girl inappropriately and Izuku could feel himself bile with disgust. Himiko take out that the guy holding the girl. He probably has a strength quirk. When that's done, come help me. Not sure what the other guy can do, Izuku said. Himiko nodded her head and Izuku couldn't help but smile. They were going to fight crime together, not as heroes but they were better than them anyway so it doesn't matter. Izuku and Himiko was going to make a difference as they jumped down into the alleyway. Izuku had planned to jump down onto the man's head. But whatever was floating around the man was hard. Izuku's foot slammed into it and Izuku winced at the force. The man noticed this attack and immediately jumped back. Whatever was floating around him became sharp and pointed at Izuku threateningly. Izuku was about to charge with his bolt quirk but a sudden yell behind him made him stop. The man saw what happened behind Izuku and used whatever around him to create a wall. Izuku then quickly scaled the building, making claws on his hands and feet and pulling himself up the wall with ease. Izuku jumped over the wall and saw the man getting onto a motorbike. Izuku summoned a tentacle and sent it forward but was immediately stopped by an immense amount of pain on his lower back. Izuku quickly doubled over onto his knees. He watched whatever the man's quirk was to create the wall surround him again before he took off on his motorbike. Izuku could feel something cold running down his back. It was definitely BLD. He couldn't let whoever that man was get away. Izuku used fat inflammation to heal whatever wound he had on his back before concentrating 𝗧𝗪𝗧 on the motorbike. Izuku could catch up to him with Bolt, but whatever quirk the man had was dangerous up close. So he focused his tentacle quirk on the man's bike. He could summon tentacles on any surface but it was incredibly stressful to do so. He felt the purple patches of his skin tighten. A tentacle was summoned on the man's bike. The man panicked and before he could act, Izuku knocked him off of his bike, causing the man to skid across the ground. Izuku waited for him to get up but he made no movement to. Whatever was floating around his body absorbing back into his body. Izuku stretched out a tentacle from his body and pulled the unconscious man over to him. While doing that, Izuku looked behind him. Himiko was trying to calm down the woman while the man who was assaulting her was sticking out of a rubbish bin. Izuku couldn't help but laugh at that. "Who are you two?" she asked, still somewhat scared. Izuku doesn't blame her, they most certainly don't look like heroes and she was just sexually assaulted moments ago. "It's okay, we are just here to help." "Now what happened here?" Izuku asked. The girl sighed and she looked behind her, looking at the man in the bin. "That's my ex-boyfriend. He's a control freak who doesn't like being told no. That's why I dumped him. Looks like he finally found me again," the woman said, glaring at the man. Izuku nodded his head understandingly. The woman groaned and looked up to the sky. "It's just so frustrating. His father is part of the police so he gets away with almost everything. Not to mention with his stupid quirk he believes he's on top of the world." The girl complains. Izuku frowns. Izuku hates this type of behavior from anyone. People who have authority as well as a child with a powerful quirk are basically untouchable. It makes Izuku sick. His sister and her friends got away with everything while doing it to him. Just because he doesn't have a quirk and they have heroic parents. Izuku can relate. "Alright, who's this though?" Himiko asked, pointing over to the man Izuku had in his tentacle. The girl in response shrugged. "The dude doesn't really have actual friends. He probably just paid him to act as a bodyguard," she responded. Izuku nodded his head. He took the man who was the victim's ex-boyfriend's quirk and left the other guy with his. He probably didn't deserve to have it taken. Himiko and Izuku were about to leave and let the girl call the police when she suddenly yelled for them. "Wait! What's your names?" she asked. Himiko and Izuku turned to each other. Himiko quickly leaned over to Izuku and whispered something to him. "What's my name again?" she asked. Izuku gave her a deadpan stare before putting his hand onto his face. He sighed before looking over to the girl. "I'm Hope and this is 𝗬𝗄𝗧. We're here to help the people that the heroes refuse to save," Izuku said, before turning into an electric bolt and flying off. The woman in the alley watched as 𝗬𝗬𝗧 started to doing flips on the walls until she reached the roof and sped off without a sound. "Seven woe," was all she had to say. One Aizawa was tired. He's always tired, but right now, he's tired of being outside of his apartment. The Izuku Yagi case was already a thorn in his side, but now the new vigilante duo is going to give him even more problems though. 3 Eraserhead doesn't care about vigilantes. These two aren't dangerous or employ a lot of force to take down offenders, so he isn't really bothered by them. However, 𝗬𝗏𝗧𝗏 is a different story, purely because of the fact that they both seem to have multiple quirks. 𝗬𝗏𝗧𝗏 is convinced that one of them is 𝗧𝗵𝗃𝗲's successor. Aizawa does agree, but in a slightly different way than 𝗬𝗏𝗧𝗏. 𝗬𝗏𝗧𝗏 says that their partner has multiple quirks, but from what Aizawa has been able to gather from both the victims and attackers, that the one called Camilla uses her BLD to create items. She probably has the ability to create any item as long as she knows how it's made, which explains how she created fire and acid. 2 Aizawa has also determined their names and genders. Camilla is a girl while Hope is a boy. Yes, boy and girl, both are young. Extremely young, maybe high school juniors at the oldest. But Aizawa thinks that might not be the case. Well, at least not with one of them. 𝗬𝗏𝗧𝗏 wants him on the case as Aizawa is one of the few that knows about All for One. He'd be doing it with all might, endeavor, and Sir Night Eye. With helping, Aizawa is sure they can definitely find this vigilante duo, but he needs to find them first. This vigilante has been giving quirks to other people and taking them from villains and thugs. But it seems like he doesn't take them from everyone. The people who he has given quirks to say he is a savior and will protect the outcasts like them. 𝗬𝗏𝗧𝗏 and All Might are convinced that this is all a scheme to amass a cult following like the original All for One. But it doesn't make sense. 8 Why would he have an accomplice with him? Why help people and not give them quirks, and why not steal the quirks from all of the villains? Wouldn't it be smarter to bribe the villains, those who already are against the law, than those who aren't? Frankly, it doesn't make sense unless they want to be a true hero. Aizawa has noticed a pattern. Well, not a pattern, things that Hope has done with his quirk. He likes to steal the strong quirks, not from everyone, but from people who have authoritative parents like police, hero commission, or straight-out heroes. They seem to be egotistical and very narcissistic to everyone around them. Aizawa knows how people act, especially with kids. He is a teacher after all. Ignore the fact he has already expelled his first years this year. So this person probably has experienced such things from other people from their quirk. But they'd still have the determination and willpower to pull it off for good purposes instead of becoming an but with their new power. Izuku Yagi fits that bill. 42 He may be incorrect, overthinking this entire thing. But if he is right, then Izuku has All for One. But now the question is, how did he get it? Izuku was going to his job in his friend's cafe. His quirk pitch really helps with singing, and it's kind of a breeze to do so. Himiko's following him as they arrive in. They got there about 15 minutes, so Izuku had time to prepare. They've been a vigilante duo for slightly more than a week now, which has been awesome. Izuku has increased his quirk limit to 10 and has given so many people quirks. They've all looked so happy having a quirk that'll make them normal like everyone else. Izuku also has received 5 new quirks from it as well. Two of them aren't that special. He has a quirk called Horns that gives him red horns on his head. He can extend them and make them sharp, but it causes pain to his skull. Izuku hasn't used it as it really has no usefulness unless he needs to stab someone who is on top of him. The next one is Retardant that blocks electrical attacks from his hands. It is useful because of his heavy skeleton quirk makes him susceptible to electric quirks, but other than that, it's got nothing. 2 But his next 3 quirks are awesome though. The first one was a simple strength enhancement quirk, but he could combine that with a quirk he already had, Strong Impact. Strong Impact was a weird quirk. Izuku could increase his punches and kicks to devastating power, but he had a limit on how many times he can do it. It started with twice a day, but now Izuku can do it 8. He wants, so he'll have to train that quirk a bit more. The strength enhancement quirk was definitely helping. For the next one was Missile Teeth. Izuku could fire his teeth out like missiles and cause a surprisingly powerful explosion. Mainly as shrapnel cutting skin, but it is still effective. The reason he has this quirk is because the guy who had it couldn't use it. Once they fired their teeth, they wouldn't grow back. But thanks to Izuku's quirk, he could, and since his teeth were metal, they hurt a lot more. Unfortunately, he had run out of space. Izuku wishes he could trade in one of his other quirks for it, but for now he'll have to wait. 3. His next quirk has the same problem. It's awesome, but unfortunately Izuku has run out of space. It's called adapt, which means if Izuku takes damage from something, say fire, he will become increasingly resistant to it. The quirk is quite specific, but it would still be a strong quirk. It was unfortunate it ended up in the hands of a murderer. 34. Izuku walked into the cafe and immediately spotted his friend Akito. He was sitting next to his older sister Nomi, who, unlike him with black skin, she had pure black hair and eyes. She is a part of a villain rehabilitation program since she has used her quirk to go invisible in dark areas to steal things. Izuku has only met her a couple of times but knows she's nice, just defensive of her little brother. 3. Izuku hasn't told her about his quirk. The only people who know are Himaki, Akito, and Himiko. Since Izuku's appearance likes to change with what quirks he receives, Izuku has had to find a lie to explain. It was hard, as one day he could have horns and the next day they could be gone. But Izuku was able to land on one. Mutation, he can gain a random attribute to his body. They can appear or disappear whenever with no pattern. She seems to take that explanation, as well as curious children on the street. Izuku walked over to them with Himiko in tow. They sat down with the two shadow twins smiling at their arrival. "Hey guys. You ready for your gig, Izuku?" Nomi asked. Izuku smiled brightly. "Yeah, I am. How have you been with the whole villain program?" Izuku asked. Nomi sighed, brushing the hair out of her face. "Yesterday was SHT. The person in charge of that day is sexist as hell. The only reason it was bearable was one of the volunteers," Nomi answered. "Why? Are they cute?" Himiko asked, trying to tease her. Nomi scoffs with a smirk and leans back in her chair. Izuku has heard a bit about the volunteers. She has to go to 2 different locations for her villain rehabilitation, and depending on the location or the day, the volunteer is different. Except, Izuku has only heard bad things about the volunteers from her. "Wait, I thought you didn't like any of them." Izuku questions, which Nomi responds with a shrug. "No, I like one, the other 4 are awful though. Thank God the one I like was there though. Our supervisor was being a real butt," Nomi said. "What did they do?" Akito asked. "Oh, he yelled at them. Basically calling them a sexist pig, and why are you here to help them if you aren't even going to bother to do your job? He's reporting that 𝗧𝗪, so hopefully we don't have to worry about him again," Nomi said with a satisfied smirk. 3. So I'll restate it, are they cute? Himiko said. Nomi face-palmed and looked at Himiko with a dead look. "I'm gay, Himi, so I don't care," Nomi said. Himiko blinked at her before laughing nervously, then started cuddling up to Izuku. Izuku blushed but let her do so. Nomi and Akito smirked at the two as they watched Izuku pat Himiko's head. 21. What about you two? You both seem too close to be just friends, Akito says, smugly looking at the two. Izuku freezes, his face suddenly sparking red. Himiko shrugs and smiles wider as she squeezes Izuku closer. Izuku then starts to think, are him and Himiko more than friends? Well, they do live together and fight crime together, which is more than just regular friends. But as partners? Izuku never really has thought much about it, as everyone has always either mocked him or ignored him. But Himiko has always been attached to him by the hip, never leaving his side. Maybe they are more than friends. Wait guys, I want to grab a milkshake, Izuku hears a voice says. A voice that is familiar. Nomi obviously recognizes as well as she turns her head around to look at them. Izuku tenses, he becomes unmoving as a wave of paranoia and fear. Izumi had just walked into the cafe. 3. Her blonde hair and shining blue eyes walk into the store with a happy smile. Izuku shudders at the memory of her face, the sinister and evil smile she barred at him multiple times while hitting him with a chair or a block of ice. 2. Himiko, sensing his distress, looks up and notices what Izuku was looking at. A girl with straight shiny blonde hair with a nice shirt and skirt walked into the store. Himiko pouted before she felt Izuku shake slightly. Looking at Izuku, Himiko remembered what caught her attention. Izuku was scared. Himiko has known Izuku for a while now and she knows he isn't a scaredy cat. Izuku is anxious and cautious, but he isn't scared. Brave and courageous in all situations. So Izuku being scared of just looking at a person doesn't make sense. Unless it's one of the 5 people Izuku has mentioned to her. Now Himiko doesn't know their names. Izuku calls them by childish nicknames and purposefully hasn't elaborated on their actual names. Probably knowing that she would go after them. She knows that she can't do that, but it doesn't make her any happier. But which one is this? Himiko knows that there is 3 girls and 2 guys, with one of them being his sister. Izuku then watches as another 4 people walk into the store. He recognizes all of them. Katsuki, Shoto, Kotsumi, and Ẓayato all walk in. Kotsumi has the same sneer and bored look on her face, her hands shoved into her briefs pockets and walking with a hunch yet keeping her head high to try and look down on anyone. Shoto has his same neutral look on his face as he looks reluctant to really do anything for others. Ẓayato is next to him, trying to hide behind any kind of spotlight yet observing everyone else with a slight glare. The Katsuki who doesn't look angry, frustrated or annoyed. He doesn't have his signature hunch as he stomps to any location where he sees to be his personal playground. He seems oddly calm, an expression Izuku has only seen a few times. It becomes even clearer when their eyes meet. Katsuki seems to be look over him. Izuku thinks he would sneer or laugh at his appearance, he does look strange with all of his quirks. But instead he sees something that Izuku hasn't seen since they were kids. A small smile. One that wasn't full of malice, pride or degrading of others. It was genuine, one that Izuku only his glimpses of before they got their quirks. 11 Katsuki quickly turned away and he no longer had that smile. But Izuku couldn't get that thought out of his head. That isn't the same Katsuki he remembers. What happened? The group walked to the counter and Izumi bought a milkshake but Katsuki lingered behind the group. He was glancing at Izuku's table every once in a bit. The group then started to leave but Katsuki didn't go with them. Kotsumi turned around and gave him a glare which Katsuki returned. "You coming?" she asked, her rude attitude seeping into her voice. Katsuki rolled his eyes and put his hands in his pocket. "I'll catch up, I've got something to do," he said. Turning around to the table where Izuku sat today. Kotsumi and the rest of the group all turned to the table. Nomi smiled at them and gave them a wave. Kotsumi scoffed and turned around. "You're not fluking on us again. You better catch up in 10 minutes otherwise I'll beat your butt," she said. "Sure you will," was all Katsuki said before he started walking over to the table. Nomi smirked and turned to them. "Speak of the devil. Those are the 5 volunteers and this is the only good one," Nomi said. She scooted over on the chair. Katsuki then sat down in it. Izuku was tensed, he was as stiff as a rock. He was trying to calm himself. Katsuki was acting different, way different than his usual hot-tempered attitude from how he had been before. Himiko meanwhile was glaring at Katsuki, who for some reason didn't seem to mind. "Hey, this is Bakugo. He comes to the villain rehabilitation program to help out." "Bakugo, these are my friends," Nomi said. Bakugo flipped his head up. "Sup," Bakugo said. Akito smiled and waved his hand. "Hey, I'm her younger brother, Akito," Akito said. Izuku then realized it was his turn. He couldn't come up with a fake name. Nomi was right there and he's not sure if she'll question it or not. She knows that Izuku and Himiko are runaways, who currently lives in a junkyard. But it wouldn't make sense that they were willing to tell her that but not Bakugo. Izuku smiled nervously as he realized his fate was sealed. "I am Izuku. And nice to meet you," Izuku said. Himiko was about to answer but she yelped when Akito kicked her leg. He saw what her face looked like. And kicked her to try and get rid of her hatred-filled expression. Himiko growled at him before forcing a smile and purposefully baring her fangs. "Toga," she said with forced happiness. Bakugo nodded his head, his eyes lasting on Izuku for a little too long. Izuku was scared that he would recognize him. He knew it was outlandish for him to do so. He now had several additions to his appearance that a quirkless person like him wouldn't have. White hair, red horns, purple patches of skin, metal teeth. It would be crazy for Katsuki to know who he was. The only way he could know that if he was actively searching for him, which would be ridiculous. He wouldn't know anything about 𝗧𝗵𝗃, so there is no way he would know. Right. Luckily for Izuku, he caught something at the corner of his eye. Looking over, he saw Himaki waving him over, telling him that he needed to go. Izuku sighed in relief as he quickly stood up. Sorry, looks like I'm starting, Izuku said. Himiko's smile changed from forced to genuine as she waved at Izuku. Good luck, Izuku-kun, she said, happily making Izuku smile. Izuku waved and left for his singing gig. Katsuki took this opportunity to leave, knowing the rest of his gang wouldn't be happy if he just ditched. Izuku's job eventually ended though, and him and Himiko had said goodbye to their friends and left. But the atmosphere as they walked was tensed. Izuku was still reminiscing on Katsuki. He seemed so docile compared to the violent and brash boy he had grown up with. He was different. Still rude and loud, but no longer so upfront and angry as before. If it wasn't for Himiko huffing as she walked, Izuku may have gone into a muttering storm. Those were the people who hurt you, weren't they? Himiko said, looking over at Izuku. Izuku flinched at the accusation before sighing in defeat. Himiko looked stern, an expression he's never seen on her before. Izuku reluctantly nodded his head. He was scared at what was going through her head. No matter what it was never good. I'm going to kill those assholes, she said. Izuku quickly started flailing his hands everywhere. What, no Himi, you can't do that, Izuku said, but then he stopped. Himiko still looked stern as she looked up to him, but tears were at the edges of her eyes, threatening to spill. 3 No. They hurt you, not just a little. They got away with everything because of their parents and powerful quirks and are going to become heroes. If they aren't stopped, they'll never stop. If they are willing to do all of those things to someone who they once saw as a friend, what do you think they'll do to a stranger? Himiko yelled. She had gripped Izuku's shirt tightly as she held on to him. Izuku could only stare in shock as he looked Himiko's in the eyes. She looked distraught and desperate as a few tears had fallen from her. Izuku didn't know what to say. Izuku started working the gears in his head for an answer to give her when another voice spoke up. I agree with that, a raspy voice said. Izuku's head flipped around. Himiko looked at who had spoken and immediately became defensive. The person who had just spoken to them had a smug smile. He was leaning against the wall of an alleyway with his arms crossed over his chest. The man had icy turquoise eyes and shaggy black hair. He had a large leather black jacket and a few silver decorations. He had large combat boots and the man had several piercings. But the most concerning part about him was he had staples on his face that held the flaky parts of his skin to the burned patches of it. 11 Izuku got into a fighting stance and Himiko got in one too. She had her hand in her pocket ready to grab a knife. The man laughed at their actions and pushed himself off the wall. The man put his hands in his pockets as he smiled at the two. You know, I've had trouble finding you. This whole time I've been trying to find a quirkless bushhead, but look at you now, the man said. Izuku suddenly became scared. How did this stranger know who he was? His parents, who were top pro heroes looking for him, who now had 𝗧𝗵𝗃, couldn't find him, but this random thug could. Himiko growled and moved in front of Izuku. She pulled out her knife and was ready to attack. Who are you? She asked angrily and threateningly. She was ready to strike as soon as the man made a move. The man smirked and raised his hands as a mock surrender. 𝗵𝗃 or 𝗧𝗏? Which do you prefer? Are you going to kill me to keep me silent? The man asked. Himiko growled, but Izuku quickly put a hand on her shoulder and pulled her back. Calm yourself, he's just trying to antagonize you, Izuku said, looking at the man. The man hummed and put his hands back in his pockets. Guess I can't call you Bushhead anymore here, the man said. Izuku paused as he looked at the man. Hey, Izuku said. Can't call him Bushhead anymore. There's only one person who ever called him Bushhead, and unfortunately, he's dead. The man smirked wider, causing the staples on his face to stretch. The man then outstretched his arm and Izuku watched as he ignited a brilliant blue flame. Izuku wasn't dumb. Fire quirks are quite common, but they all are pretty similar. The main difference being where the person can activate the quirk. Endeavor's quirk is an anomaly in his unnaturally hot fire, and the only people who can match his heat are people who can charge their flames before producing them. Only one person has ever had a fire quirk hotter than 𝗫𝗏𝗧𝗏. But he was dead. Wasn't he? Hey Izuku, it's me, the man said, his smirk turning soft as he extinguished his flames. Izuku gasped at the man. 𝗬𝗧𝗏. That man was 𝗬𝗧𝗏. 𝗬𝗧𝗏 was the one person after his diagnosis who protected him. Who saw what was going on and didn't care that he was quirkless and wanted to help him. He was alive. 𝗬𝗧𝗏. Izuku said shakily as he took a few steps towards him. 𝗬𝗧𝗏 smiled, outstretching his arms to Izuku. Izuku cracked out a sob and ran to 𝗬𝗧𝗏 and hugged him. 𝗬𝗧𝗏 laughed as he grabbed Izuku and embraced him. Sorry I left kid, 𝗬𝗧𝗏 said as he bent down and hugged Izuku tighter. Izuku cried softly into his shoulder as he returned the hug. Himiko was in the corner, slightly confused but accepted whatever was happening. She put her knife away and watched whatever was happening in front of her. Izuku sobbed as he gripped 𝗬𝗧𝗏 as much as he could. I thought why, Izuku shuddered. He felt 𝗬𝗧𝗏 nod and rubbed the back of his head soothingly, trying to keep him calm. I did, well tried. I didn't succeed but I couldn't face what I had just done. So I ran. I was too scared to come back to even see my father so I didn't. I'm sorry I left you alone. I had hoped they would change but knew they wouldn't. I'm so sorry, 𝗬𝗧𝗏 said, his voice becoming strained. Izuku choked and hugged 𝗬𝗧𝗏 tighter. They stayed in a death grip with each other for. Eventually, the two backed off with each other and 𝗬𝗧𝗏 straightened up. He laughed and walked over to Himiko and pulled her in. He kept one arm around Izuku's shoulder and put his other around Himiko. He bent down and pulled them together. You two have been getting up to a lot of things lately, 𝗬𝗧𝗏 said with a devilish smirk. Himiko looks at him confused. Excuse me, but how do you know me and Izuku? Himiko asked. 𝗬𝗧𝗏 laughed and shook his head. My biological name is 𝗬𝗧𝗏 Todoroki, the eldest son of 𝗫𝗏𝗏 and Ice Queen, 𝗬𝗧𝗏 said. Himiko gasped. She didn't know what the names of the two kids who tortured Izuku, but she did remember Izuku saying that they had 𝗫𝗏𝗏 and Ice Queen as parents. No shocker. Anyway, I go by Darby now. You still call me Qiu-chan if you want Izuku, 𝗬𝗧𝗏 said, winking at Izuku. 13 Izuku basically gleamed in happiness and smiled widely. Himiko looked away at the sheer brightness of his smile. 𝗬𝗧𝗏 or Darby was more interested in his shiny metal teeth. He didn't know they were there. Anyway, how I know is simple. I'm an underground informant. I'm powerful, I exchange protection for money or information and sometimes attack a few abusers and rob them. I found out that you hung out with a guy that had multiple weird features and managed to connect them to the rumored kid with multiple quirks. Now at first I was skeptical about it as the only person who has the quirk is a guy named 𝗬𝗏 I think. Darby says, looking over to Izuku as confirmation. Izuku nodded and Darby continued. But when people started missing their quirks I knew it was no joke. That they became a vigilante which wouldn't make sense if they were evil. After doing a bit of looking around and small bits of stalking, I found you too. Even with all your new SHT I can still see the same old bush head from all those years ago, Darby said with a SHT-eating grin. Izuku laughed but then a thought came to mind. Wait, how do you know about 𝗬𝗏? Izuku asked. Darby sighed and removed the hand around Himiko. He looked down at the ground. Darby then looked up at Izuku with his now free hand pointing at him. You know who your parents are, right? Darby asked. Izuku nodded. All Might and Green Tornado, Izuku said. Darby nodded his head and looked away. Thought so, you always were smart. Anyway, yeah, so how I know is from my father. He originally had a relationship with my mother just to have a strong child, which was me to overpass All Might. But then 𝗫𝗏𝗏 found put about one for all on all his digging to see if All Might had any weaknesses and I wad kinda there. So yeah. Look, I really wanted to tell you, I really did. But I was worried I'd hurt you even more. All Might was your entire world and me telling you he was your dad wouldn't have helped. I'm sorry, Darby said. Izuku nodded and gave Darby another hug. It's okay, you did everything you could for me Qiu-chan, Izuku said. Darby nodded then looked over to Himiko who was apprehensive. He leaned over to her and whispered. Take care of him for me. Darby asked. Himiko smiled widely and nodded her head vigorously, flashing 𝗬𝗵𝗍 a thumbs up. 𝗬𝗵𝗍 smirked and then bopped Izuku on the head. Izuku yelped and quickly recoiled and rubbed his head. 𝗬𝗵𝗍 rolled his eyes and ruffled Izuku's hair. Well, looks like I've got to head off now, 𝗬𝗵𝗍 said. Izuku immediately saddened at the prospect of 𝗬𝗵𝗍 leaving so soon. Wait, why? Izuku asked. 𝗬𝗵𝗍 huffed and smiled, although it was kind of sheepishly. He put his hand up to the back of his head and started rubbing it. Well, the police found out that you had powerful painkillers and deduced that I was the only person who could have given them to you, 𝗬𝗵𝗍 said. Izuku's eyes widened. Wait, you were the one who gave me all the medical supplies. 𝗬𝗵𝗍 grinned and gave Izuku finger guns. Yep, you ran off and I knew more SHT would happen to you after that, so I went to your house and gave you some supplies. The painkillers I gave you were strong, but I had a feeling you'd need them, 𝗬𝗵𝗍 said. Wait, are you being arrested? Himiko piped up, asking 𝗬𝗵𝗍 a question. Izuku paled at that prospect, but that quickly washed over as 𝗬𝗵𝗍 shook his head no and put his hands in his pockets as he turned over to Himiko. They'll certainly try, but as long as I know All Might's secret identity, they can't lay a finger on me. That information is too powerful to not be used, 𝗬𝗵𝗍 said with an evil smirk, one that Himiko matched, which concerned Izuku a little. More than a little. But then a thought sprung into Izuku's mind. If 𝗬𝗵𝗍 pulls that card to get out of jail, then All Might would be after him. He'd use 𝗬𝗵𝗍 to try and lure him out, or just straight up kill him to try and hold the secret. Even with 𝗬𝗵𝗍's incredibly powerful quirk, All Might could still kill him quicker than how 𝗬𝗵𝗍 could kill All Might. Izuku couldn't just let something like that happen, but he can't keep tabs on 𝗬𝗵𝗍 24/7. Unless he gives him something. It is unfortunate, yes. It is a strong quirk that would have been really useful for Izuku in the long run, but 𝗬𝗵𝗍 needs it more. Not only will it help with his quirk, but it could save him against All Might or any other person trying to kill him. Wait, 𝗬𝗵𝗍, before you go, Izuku said, quickly running up to 𝗬𝗵𝗍. 𝗬𝗵𝗍 turned around and looked at Izuku with a raised eyebrow. Yeah, Snow Cone, what is it? 𝗬𝗵𝗍 asked. Izuku frowned at the nickname, which made 𝗬𝗵𝗍 smile wider. He rolled his eyes and continued with what he was going to say. Well, you know about All for One, right? How I can steal and give quirks. Izuku said. 𝗬𝗵𝗍 nodded. You want to give me a quirk? 𝗬𝗵𝗍 said. Exactly, Izuku said with a large smile. 𝗬𝗵𝗍 huffed but smiled nonetheless. He reached out his hand for Izuku, who then grabbed it. Izuku focused on his quirk. He grabbed Adapt. It felt intelligent, susceptible to change, survivable and knowing. A quirk that could do a lot of things. He then pushed it into 𝗬𝗵𝗍. While Izuku was there, he thought he may as well check out 𝗬𝗵𝗍's quirk. On the outside, it felt hot, elegant and angry at the same time. Despite how common they were, this was the first time Izuku had come into contact with one, so the feeling was kind of overwhelming. It may have just been 𝗬𝗵𝗍's quirk though, as it was way too powerful for his own body. Izuku decided to dive deeper into the quirk, but instead of finding complexities, he found cold. It was freezing, no warmth or light anywhere. Izuku didn't understand what was going on. He tried going deeper, but the cold was just too much and it forced Izuku out. 𝗬𝗍 groaned as he felt the unnatural force enter his body. 𝗬𝗍 then leaned against the wall as he tried balancing himself. Izuku was breathing as he looked at his hands. He hasn't had All for One for that long, but he has traded and gifted quirks several times. Why was this time so different, and why did it hurt going into 𝗬𝗍's quirk? So what quirk did you give me, kid? 𝗬𝗍 asked. Izuku tried recovering himself, but it wasn't working. He used fat inflammation and instantly whatever sensation of pain he was feeling was gone. Ignoring it for now, Izuku quickly got up and went over to 𝗬𝗍. It's called Adapt. If you're hurt by something, you'll gain a resistance to it, like fire or cutting. But before you head off, I need to check if the quirk is suitable for your body, Izuku said. He knows most people can't handle two quirks. Some people can't even handle combination quirks, but with how powerful 𝗬𝗍's quirk was, Izuku thought he'd be able to handle a completely different quirk. After placing his hand in 𝗬𝗍's chest, Izuku was glad to find that 𝗬𝗍 was fine. However, what was happening was weird. It seemed like 𝗬𝗍's quirk was attacking the other quirk. It seemed to have injured it, but now it was no longer taking damage. Izuku tried to take it back so he could heal it, but something was stopping him from doing so, same with 𝗬𝗲𝗏's original quirk. Strange, Izuku had no clue why this was happening. But he can't keep 𝗬𝗏 around forever, he has to go. They'll discuss this more when they see each other again. Izuku sighed and nodded his head. You're all good, Izuku said. 𝗬𝗏 seemed to be in pain, but he was loosening up a bit. He pushed himself off of the wall and stood up. All right, Snow Cone, Vampire, I'll see you two later. I know where you two live, so expect a surprise visit, 𝗬𝗏 said and waved off. Izuku and Himiko watched as he left, but Izuku couldn't help but get a gut feeling that something was wrong when he went to look into 𝗬𝗏's quirk. 𝗬𝗏 looked into the interrogation room, slightly fearful. There was something unnerving about the man in there. It may be his appearance, but 𝗬𝗏 also remembers when they had met. He seemed like a bomb that would explode any moment, and what was worse, he seemed smart. Maybe not in the academic way, but most certainly in knowledge. He seemed powerful in both physical aspects and intelligence aspects, despite the fact he looks like a heretic and about to crumble any second. 𝗬𝗏 sat in an interrogation room. Despite him coming in willingly, quirk-canceling cuffs were immediately placed on him. The reason being was 𝗬𝗏 asked Doc what his quirk was, and her answer was scary. He can emit fire hotter than 𝗫𝗏, able to turn someone completely into ash in seconds. 𝗬𝗏 doesn't feel comfortable going in there without that safety net, not anybody else. Which is why Eraserhead would be with him. 𝗬𝗏 doesn't know much about him, no one does, but what they do know is that he doesn't like a lot of people. But from their brief interaction, 𝗬𝗏 seems to somewhat respect Eraserhead. 𝗬𝗏 and Aizawa looked to the left when they heard approaching footsteps. All Might, 𝗫𝗏, Green Tornado, and Ice Queen were walking over to them. 𝗬𝗏 nodded a greeting. Hello, Green Tornado waved. 𝗫𝗏 bowed slightly and looked into the interrogation room and frowned. So this is the guy who knows Izuku? 𝗫𝗏 asked, a bit skeptical. All Might nodded his head. I don't think Izuku would have been affiliated with someone like this, he said. Aizawa let out a low growl and quietly muttered. How would you know, with a snarl that only 𝗬𝗏 could hear? What happened to him? It looks like he was burned alive, Green Tornado asked. Not burned, frozen. Those are freeze burns, why are they all over his body like that? Ice Queen asked. 𝗬𝗏 sighed as he walked into the interrogation room door, Aizawa behind him. That's what we're hoping to find out, 𝗬𝗏 said. He took in a deep breath, trying to quell his ensuing nerves. Aizawa noted his hand shaking slightly as he opened the door. 𝗬𝗏 had looked extremely bored before, but now he has a smile on his face. 𝗬𝗏 gulped at the creepiness of it as it stretches his stitches across his face. Hey detective, you got some questions you need to ask me, he asked with a smug smile. 𝗬𝗏 put on a hard expression, trying to hide his nerves. Aizawa looked at 𝗬𝗏, who didn't really give him any acknowledgement. Aizawa also was holding a book and a pen. Yes we do, 𝗬𝗏 said, him and Aizawa finding their seats across from him. 𝗬𝗏 still had a wide smile over his face as he looked over the two. So what do you want to know first? Me or Izuku? 𝗬𝗏 asked, leaning back over his chair. He pulls his cuffed hands behind his head and smiled dangerously at them. 𝗬𝗏 took in a breath, determined to not look scared in front of him. Aizawa rolled his eyes and leaned forward, glaring down the scarred man. We'll go with Izuku first, he said, before looking over to 𝗬𝗏. He gives him a nudge. 𝗬𝗏 blinks, before coughing into his closed hand. He brings up a notepad and looks over to 𝗬𝗏. All right, I suggest that you don't lie, as my quirk is lie detection. Now first question, why did you request 2 weeks before coming here? 𝗬𝗏 asked. 𝗬𝗏 scoffs and rolled his eyes. To find Izuku, 𝗬𝗏 said. 𝗬𝗏's eyes widen, he was telling the truth. He raised an eyebrow at the man in front of him. To find Izuku. So you know where he is, 𝗬𝗏 says. 𝗬𝗏 laughs and shakes his head. Nah, I'll tell you what. I thought I'd find the bush head in about the week. I was only able to locate him 3 hours ago. The kid's smart, 𝗬𝗏 smiled. Is he all right? Aizawa asked. 𝗬𝗏 frowned and kicked him with his foot. Aizawa ignored him and kept his eyes on 𝗬𝗲. Of course, he's been better than what he's even been in years, 𝗬𝗲 said. 𝗧𝗵𝗲 shook his head. Is he all right? 𝗧𝗵𝗲 reiterated. His quirk only works for questions he asks. 𝗬𝗲 didn't know this and have 𝗧𝗵𝗲 a weird look. What did I just say? Yes, 𝗧𝗵𝗃, is your quirk broken or something? 𝗬𝗲 snarked, his mood suddenly becoming annoyed and angry. 𝗧𝗵𝗲 flinched back but quickly composed himself. One apologies, but my quirk only works when I ask the question, 𝗧𝗵𝗲 states. 𝗬𝗲 huffs and nods his head. He looks to the side and stares at the glass. He then smiles as he looks over it. Aizawa shakes his head at the man. He knows people are behind the one-way glass and is looking at them creepily. It certainly works as the four heroes become unnerved. The two heroines look at the man scared and concerned. He obviously isn't stable, and is a bit rough around the edges. What is his story? So he wasn't kidnapped? 𝗧𝗵𝗲 asked. 𝗬𝗲 looks back at him with a look of genuine confusion. No, why the hell would you think that? 𝗬𝗲 asked. 𝗧𝗵𝗲 shrugs. You know who Izuku's parents are, correct? Eraserhead asked. 𝗬𝗲 nods and smiles, then looking over to the one-way window. Yeah, the big oaf and his wife, Green Beach, 𝗬𝗲 says, before glaring at the window. The four heroes suddenly jump back at his change of mood. He was glaring at them all with hot hatred and anger. 3. Well, he had put up with the torment for years and suddenly disappeared. All Might had seen him heading home that day, yet never came home. We weren't sure if he had run away or been kidnapped, as you may have heard that there was someone with the ability to steal and give quirks. We actually found out about them the day Izuku went missing, 𝗧𝗵𝗲 said. 𝗬𝗲 looks over at him. His face was confused as he looked at 𝗧𝗵𝗲. Aizawa watched as the gears turned in 𝗬𝗲's head. Quickly, 𝗬𝗲's eyes widened and his face brightened in realization. He then started laughing uncontrollably, so much that he started wheezing, banging his hands on the desk. 2. This told everything Aizawa needed to know. 𝗬𝗲's reaction told Aizawa that Izuku did in fact have all for one. 5. What's so funny? 𝗧𝗵𝗲 asked, staring at 𝗬𝗲 as he dies of laughter. 𝗬𝗲 tries to recompose himself but fails. It takes a minute before he can speak again. Ahaha, nothing, I just made a connection. So got any more questions? 𝗬𝗲 asked, putting his hands in front of him on the table. 𝗧𝗵𝗲 nodded and looked down at his notes again. So, could you lead us to Izuku Yagi? 𝗧𝗵𝗲 asked. The smile on 𝗬𝗲's face instantly washes off at the sentence. He becomes serious as he looks at 𝗧𝗵𝗲. Why the hell should I, he said. There was anger in his voice, yet his expression did not convey it. 𝗧𝗵𝗲 gulped but kept his expression firm. He knitted his hands together and sent a glare at 𝗬𝗲, only to make the man glare harder back at him. Izuku Yagi is a 13-year-old quirkless kid on the street with someone powerful after him. We need to locate him as soon as 𝗧𝗵𝗲 couldn't finish his sentence as 𝗬𝗲 slammed his hands on the table. 𝗧𝗵𝗲 jumped as he looked at 𝗬𝗲. His expression was one of fury as leaned over the table to the detective. What right do you have? Izuku has been through more than what any 13-year-old boy should. For 9 years, the kid has been tormented and beaten for something he cannot control. You know what I saw when I saw him again 3 hours ago. He was happy, he was alive and not living in fear like he has done for the entirety of his life. What right do you have to take that away from him? You want to put him back to the household that has almost killed him time and time again. He would have died if I hadn't brought him to document guess who put him in that condition. But do you know why he ran away? He had no intention of running away that day, but do you know what made him? 𝗬𝗲 yelled angrily. 𝗧𝗵𝗲 was in shock. He had slid back in his chair to the back of the room. The four heroes outside of the room was ready to barge him. Unknown to 𝗬𝗲, despite the quirk-canceling cuffs he was wearing, he was burning. The areas around his lips had ignited in blue fire. Aizawa was now in front of 𝗧𝗵𝗲, stern but calm. He didn't glare back at 𝗬𝗲 as he waited for the man to calm down. Why did he run away, 𝗬𝗲? Aizawa asked. He knows he should ask 𝗧𝗵𝗲 to do so, but he doubts that 𝗬𝗲 was going to lie in this situation. He had wanted to go to UA, but those 5 friends of his didn't like that. They beat him with their quirks, with his sister telling him to go kill himself. After that, he was attacked by a villain only to be saved by 𝗵𝗃, who then told Izuku he couldn't be hero before leaping off. He was broken. Defeated, he walked home, but the door was locked. Without a key, he walked around the house so he could get to his room. But then he heard something, 𝗬𝗲 said. He then looked over to the glass. 𝗬𝗲 stood up and walked over to the glass and banged his cuffed fists on them. The SHT offered his quirk to the spoiled beach of his daughter, saying that Izuku didn't have the heart of a hero yet that CNT did. 𝗬𝗲 yelled, looking at the room angrily. The heroes all gasped at 𝗬𝗲's words and outburst. All Might, not taking kindly to the fact 𝗬𝗲 called his daughter a CNT, barged into the room in his fully buff form. How dare you, All Might said. 𝗬𝗲 turned to him with a hate-filled glare. His teeth were barred and he looked like he wanted to kill. Dare me. Die. 𝗬𝗲 yelled. He outstretched his hands. A hot blue fire ignited his palms and shot out from them. It hit All Might in the chest, making the man scream. Aizawa quickly activated his quirk, stopping 𝗬𝗲 from creating any more fire. All Might suddenly debuffed and became the frail man he was again. Aizawa quickly rushed up and pushed Toshinori out of the room and shut the door and looked back over to 𝗬𝗲. For his hands were smoking and he was pulling the hair on his head. Aizawa walked up to him and grabbed his shoulders. He started guiding 𝗬𝗲 over to his chair and sat him down. 𝗬𝗲 was taking deep breaths, completely zoned out from the world. 𝗧𝗵𝗲 and the heroes were scared. Those quirk-canceling cuffs are quite strong and powerful. Not even All Might can activate his quirk with those on. Mutant quirks are a bit different, but they still work for the most part. So why could 𝗬𝗲 still activate his quirk with those on? He was still heavily restricted, but that didn't change the fact he still was able to emit a fireball. Aizawa was rubbing circles into 𝗬𝗲's shoulder, trying to help calm him down. 𝗧𝗵𝗲 collected himself from his fear. He was so thankful that Eraserhead was on this case. 𝗬𝗲 may have blown up the whole room if he wasn't there. So, Izuku knows his parents are All Might and Green Tornado? Aizawa asks. 𝗬𝗲 replies with a nod. A few minutes passed with no one speaking. No one really sure on what to say. 𝗬𝗲 was still recovering from his freakout with All Might. Toshinori was behind the glass being healed by Ice Queen as she cooled his burn down. Inko was at his side, helping Toshinori stay calm. However, Endeavor was still looking through the glass at 𝗬𝗲. His posture was fixed and he was unmoving. His wife turned around and looked at him. "Ng, are you okay?" she asked. He didn't turn around to meet her worried gaze. "Blue fire," he said quietly. The three look at him confused. He's got a strong and dangerous quirk. It's okay, it looks like he can't use it for long, so your quirk would still be stronger, Ng, Inko said. Endeavor shook his head as he looked at the scarred man on the other side of the glass. "Only one other person has that quirk," was his reply. 𝗬𝗲 scared in a breath and sat up straight. He then looked over to Aizawa with a glare. "I'm not telling you where Izuku is," he says sternly and angrily. Aizawa nods his head. "I understand, but he still needs a guardian. So how about I become his guardian?" Aizawa asks. Inko heard this and gasps. Instantly she stands up and rushes to the door. "He can't do that," she yelled. But Endeavor stopped her, reaching his hand out and grabbing his arm. He didn't even turn to look at her, keeping his eyes on 𝗬𝗲. 𝗬𝗲 looked at Aizawa with wide eyes. He was shocked at the proposal Aizawa just gave him. He sighed and looked down. "I'll ask Izuku." "And his friend," 𝗬𝗲 said, the second sentence being a lot quieter that only Eraserhead heard. Camilla Eraserhead's mind supplied. They probably hang out in the same place and are pretty close. He knows that Hope must be Izuku, but he doesn't have a clue on who Camilla is. 𝗬𝗏 sat in his chair on the other end, waiting for 𝗬𝗲 to have calmed down. 𝗬𝗲 nodded his head and then turned to the detective. Aizawa then moved back to his chair and sat down. 𝗧𝗵𝗲 coughed as he got started. "Okay, I think that's the end of the Izuku Yagi questioning. Now, you 𝗬𝗲, 𝗧𝗵𝗲 said, looking down the man. 𝗬𝗲 rolled his eyes and nodded his head, readjusting his position in his chair. "First question, what do you do?" 𝗧𝗵𝗲 asked. 𝗬𝗲 scoffs and looked to the side. You know, info broker, lookout, bodyguard and helping people being abused. Nothing more than a year in jail, 𝗬𝗲𝗍 said. 𝗬𝗲𝗵𝗲 nodded, his quirk not going off. Alright, can you tell us your BRTH name? 𝗬𝗲𝗵𝗲 asked. 𝗬𝗲𝗍 looked at him, then 𝗬𝗏𝗧 before looking down. 𝗬𝗲𝗵𝗲 raised an eyebrow at him. He looked over to 𝗧𝗑𝗧𝗏 who shrugged his shoulders. Sighing, 𝗬𝗲𝗵𝗲 was about to ask another question when the door opened. All three looked to the new arrival. 𝗪𝗏𝗧 had walked into the room. 𝗬𝗏𝗵𝗲 and 𝗧𝗏𝗧 was confused but 𝗬𝗲𝗍 had his eyes widened. He then glared at the number 2 hero, trying to ignore the sense of fear that was creepy up around him. 𝗪𝗏𝗧 nodded to the detective and 𝗧𝗑𝗧𝗏 before looking over to 𝗬𝗲𝗍. He was glaring at him and shaking. He had a scowl on his face. 𝗪𝗏𝗧 sighed, knowing he was correct in his assumption. This was his son. 𝗬𝗲𝗧, 𝗪𝗏𝗧 said. 𝗬𝗏𝗵𝗲 and 𝗧𝗑𝗧𝗏's eyes widen at the name. They looked over to 𝗬𝗲𝗍 who was seething in rage. But 𝗧𝗏𝗧 also noted the fear in his eyes. Get out, 𝗬𝗲𝗍 said lowly, his body shaking badly. 𝗪𝗏𝗍 sighed but nodded his head. I understand, but I just wanted to say, 𝗪𝗏𝗧 said and looking calmly into 𝗬𝗲𝗍's eyes who were full of hatred. I'm sorry. 𝗪𝗏𝗧 then turned around and left the room. 𝗬𝗲𝗍's eyes were wide with shock at his words. He didn't expect an apology from his father. Ever. 𝗧𝗏𝗧 then leaned over to 𝗬𝗏𝗵𝗲. Go out there and question them, he said. 𝗬𝗏𝗵𝗲 nodded his head and stood up and left the room. Once he had, 𝗧𝗏𝗧 stood up and walked over to 𝗬𝗲𝗍 who was still stunned from his father's apology. He reached over and unlocked the handcuffs. This brought 𝗬𝗲𝗍 out of his stupor. And he turned to face 𝗧𝗑𝗧𝗏. Alright, because you know All Might's identity, we can't arrest you out of fear of you telling others. So what we're going to do instead is to make you my partner for the time being, 𝗧𝗑𝗧𝗏 said. 𝗬𝗲𝗍 looked at him shocked before sighing and shaking his head, looking down at the floor. Whatever, 𝗬𝗲𝗍 replied, not finding the strength to be snarky in this moment. For 𝗧𝗑𝗧𝗏 doesn't really care about his relation to 𝗪𝗏𝗧 or his hatred for the Yagis. He wasn't going to let Izuku go back to them anyway if they had found him. He deserved a proper family. So now his next job was to get 𝗬𝗲𝗍 to trust him so he can gain Izuku's trust. He obviously hates heroes so it will be a chore, but with 𝗬𝗲𝗍's help, he can hopefully achieve it. But 𝗧𝗏𝗧 still has one more question. One last thing, who is 𝗬𝗏𝗧? 𝗧𝗑𝗧𝗏 asked. 𝗬𝗲𝗍 looks back at him before smirking and scoffing. At least one of you has a brain, 𝗬𝗲𝗍 said, knowing that 𝗧𝗑𝗧𝗏 had made the connection that Izuku had all for one. They live together in their hidey hole. They're friends, but probably will be more soon, 𝗬𝗲𝗍 replied with a smirk. 17 𝗧𝗑𝗧𝗏 was out on the streets early in the morning. Very early in the morning. 𝗧𝗑𝗧𝗏 would have taken the day off in normal circumstances after just being in the police station for hours, but right now he needed to find someone. Thanks to his knowledge of All Might's identity and quirk, 𝗬𝗏𝗍 could technically get off scot-free. He knows that 𝗬𝗏𝗧 would never let him go on the prospect that he is a criminal, so 𝗧𝗑𝗧𝗏 has made him his partner. It's not doing him any favors, 𝗧𝗑𝗧𝗏 doesn't want nor need a partner, but it just makes the situation a lot easier. Especially when getting information from him. Knowing that he is the son of the number 2 and 13 hero is concerning. The fact that 𝗧𝗏𝗧 didn't know he existed didn't make him any less concerned. Off of articles from the man, he knew he had 4 kids with the eldest one being a daughter. But to his knowledge the other male that isn't Shoto has an ice quirk. So was he erased or something? What happened? 𝗬𝗧𝗏 would have to ask that later, as 𝗬𝗲𝗍 is probably not willing to say anything else that would bring back harmful memories. He does need 𝗬𝗲𝗍 to trust him, as it is clear that he is the only person 𝗬𝗲𝗍 has taken seriously or respects. He did ask a few more questions to him that wouldn't set off a trigger. Like his age and when he ran away. 𝗬𝗏𝗍 is 25 and he is pretty sure that the eldest daughter is 23, which raises a few more questions for the tired hero. 𝗬𝗏𝗍 had ran away 10 years ago, which does make sense to 𝗧𝗏𝗧. It was about that time when 𝗪𝗏𝗧 had a notable change of character. He was always cold and arrogant with a very short fuse. He had the most property damage of any other hero in Japan within his first 2 years of being a solo hero and has triple the civilian causalities of the other top 10 heroes combined, and the stats of how many villains he has killed wasn't open for the public to see. Meaning they were bad. But a decade ago, he improved. He became nicer to the civilians and often tried to hold his fuse instead of lashing out whenever he felt like it. He wasn't successful some of the time, but he was improving. But the most notable thing was his stats. His property damage had more than halved it would have otherwise been in 3 months. His casualties had gone to being the most of any pro hero by a reasonable number rather than triple with all top 10 heroes combined, and his villain kills had changed from any old crook to being the dangerous villains only. He has improved a lot since then and has become a lot more respected hero than what he was before. But Aizawa was more concerned about his wife, Ice Queen. When 𝗵𝗃 had entered the room and apologized to 𝗧𝗵𝗵, wouldn't you have thought Ice Queen would have done the same? When they had left the room, 𝗵𝗃 was looking over to 𝗧𝗵𝗵, yet he couldn't help but notice that she wasn't. It seemed like to him she was choosing to look away. He did some research on her a decade ago. It seems like nothing had changed in her character or performance on handling situations. She was a lot better than 𝗵𝗃. Although most heroes were, but it's clear that both her and 𝗵𝗃 had done something to 𝗧𝗵𝗵. He doesn't want to be called 𝗬𝗧𝗏, which Eraserhead hadn't questioned, but it isn't clear as to what. But right now he'll have to put that to the back burner for the moment. Right now he has a vigilante couple to find. Eraserhead runs across the street, hoping from rooftops or just running across the street. It is a bit annoying having to stop occasionally to stop a mugging or a drunken brawl, but he's a hero. He can't ignore it even if something more important needs to be done. Unless it's dire. Eraserhead runs across the street, his feet are starting to hurt and he can feel himself becoming increasingly annoyed. He knows that they are out tonight, but he hasn't caught a glimpse of them yet. Until now. Eraserhead sees movement in the corner of his vision on the rooftops. He whps his head around and sees them running across incredibly quickly. Catching up to them will be incredibly difficult. Eraserhead starts running down the street in the direction they are, but unfortunately he comes across someone in his path. The person he'd wanted to see at any moment of time the least. Her short green hair and awful color clashing and ridiculous outfit. He sees Miss Joke smile as he races towards her. "Oh Eraser, I see you're keen on seeing me. It really has been a while," Miss Joke says with an over-the-top wave. Eraserhead groans and makes the effort to not look at her. He would love to run in the other direction, but unfortunately this is the direction he needs to run. He sidesteps her and keeps running. "Not now, Joke," Eraserhead says in his usual tired voice as he sprints past. He wishes that was that, but the tapping of footsteps tells him otherwise. He can already feel the migraine coming. He should have gotten another coffee. "Wait, Eraser, I could help," she yells. Eraserhead ignores her and uses his capture weapon to swing himself up. He lands on the porch of a building and jumps up, quickly scaling the building. He knows Miss Joke could get up here quickly as well. She annoyingly good at parkour, and he's got half the mind to think that she only got that good to try and keep up with him so she could annoy him more. Eraserhead hopes she had just given up. He shouldn't look back, but he did anyway. He groans as he sees her climbing up after him. Eraserhead continued to chase down the retreating figures. He wasn't closing the distance, but he wasn't being lost either. But then he saw them hop down. Eraserhead continued after them. But God, this is why he works alone, as Miss Joke must not have noticed the two people he was chasing after, nor realizing he is trying to be quiet. "Eraser, hold up," she yells. Eraserhead knows she's not going to stop chasing him for a long while, and she'll probably still be there when they reach the two vigilantes. Eraserhead huffed and spun around to look at her. Her glares at her with his quirk activated. He motions his lip zipping while giving her a death glare. Miss Joke immediately halts. She smiles shakily and nods her head. Eraserhead sighs and drops his head. He deactivates his quirk and lets his hair fall over his face. He smirks and turns around and continuing his chase. He reaches the part where the vigilantes had jumped down to find them still there. The male was wrapping a rope around a guy's hand. He seemed to be conscious, but he wasn't struggling and did look hurt. There was another man in the alley as well, and he was getting consoled by the female. Hope and Carmilla. He notes Joke making her way next to him, but he doesn't turn to her. He waits until the two start climbing back onto the roofs. He had to talk to them but hopes they don't run away. He had a feeling that even if he had deactivated their quirks they'd probably find a way around it and get away. He needed their trust and he hopes they'll at least give him a shot. "Hello Hope and 𝗵𝗃𝗲, Eraserhead said. He hears Joke gasp next to him which causes a tick mark to spark on his forehead. The two vigilantes turn to face them. 𝗵𝗃𝗲 looks over him and Miss Joke and gets into a fighting stance. However, Hope's eyes go wide. He seems to recognize Eraserhead as their eyes lock. He quickly pounces over to 𝗵𝗃𝗲 and grabs her shoulder and pulls her back. "Wait, I'm not here to fight or try and turn you in. I just want to talk," Eraserhead said quickly, catching on to the fact that they were about to run. Hope turns back to look at him while 𝗵𝗃𝗲 glares at him harder. "And why is that hobo?" she accused, getting down. Eraserhead watches as blood drips from her palm and forms into a knife. Hi 𝗵𝗃𝗲, wait. That's Eraserhead, he can turn your quirk off by looking at you. "Let's wait and be civil," Hope says, trying to calm 𝗵𝗃𝗲 down. 𝗵𝗃𝗲 isn't totally bought as she still holds her knife close to her. "Very protective," Eraserhead notes. "Shouldn't be surprised you know me. From what I've heard about you Izuku, you love heroes," Eraserhead said. He has said this to see the kid's reaction. From what he heard from his old friends, mainly Katsuki, Izuku was a hero fanboy and always wanted to be one. He was a bright and happy kid but also very timid and humble. From Katsuki he heard that Izuku is one of the most determined people that has ever existed. If he wanted something done, he'd do it. "Yeah, my opinion of them has gone down over. Whoa, it has been 4 months now, it feels like time has flown by," Izuku said, going completely off track. This shocked Eraserhead. This was not at all the response he was expecting. He was expecting shock of knowing who he was or anger of his past self for loving heroes and how he loathes them now. But he didn't seem that all fazed at him knowing that he was Izuku Yagi and still seemed to like heroes but not as much anymore. He then went back to the interrogation with 𝗧𝗵𝗲. He seemed perplexed when 𝗧𝗵𝗲 mentioned Izuku went missing the day the all-for-one kid showed up. Like there was a connection 𝗧𝗵𝗲 was supposed to make, but didn't. He started bellowing out in laughter and at the end, he said that only he had a brain. Izuku obviously had all for one. But did he think that they already knew? "Wait, is that Izuku Yagi? Isn't he quirkless?" Miss Joke whispered. Whispered, it was more like a whisper shout. She had said that very loudly for attempting to listen as both 𝗵𝗃𝗲 and Izuku had heard. Eraserhead sees 𝗵𝗃𝗲 growl slightly and glare over to Joke. Eraserhead turns to look at her with an unbelieving look. She smiles shakily again, knowing she messed up. "Yes Joke, that Izuku Yagi. But there is a lot more to the story," Eraserhead said as he looked at her tiredly. He rolled his eyes at her puppy eyes as she tried to make herself look cute to make Eraser stop glaring at her. They definitely didn't work. He then turned to Izuku. "Yagi, don't call me that," Izuku said with slight anger as he interrupted Eraserhead. Aizawa didn't question it at all. He understands why Izuku wouldn't want to be called Yagi. "Izuku, why do you think your family is looking for you?" Eraserhead asked. Izuku looked at him confused but shrugged anyway. "Well, they know I know All Might's secret and I have his enemy's quirk. They want to take me back to make sure I stay quiet and beat me even more," Izuku responded. Eraserhead sighed. He had predicted that. "Well, what if I told you that's not the case?" Eraserhead said. Izuku looks at him weirdly. He then crosses his arms over his chest and tilts his head to the side. "Your parents have no clue you know their hero identities. They think that you and Hope are two different people. The all-for-one kid would be trying to kidnap you as you're trying to start a cult." Eraserhead said, adding quotation fingers to the last part of his sentence. He saw 𝗵𝗃𝗲 look at him oddly before suppressing a chuckle, quickly putting a hand to her mouth. Izuku, however, was a bit different. He was looking at the ground. He seemed to be in two different states. Shock and disbelief. "No," Izuku said, shaking his head, "they are lying. They've only ever hurt me, they'd have no other reason to report me missing unless they knew," Izuku said. He was shaking, making Eraserhead and Miss Joke worried for the boy. 𝗵𝗃𝗲 quickly turns around and squeezes him in a hug. She sends glares over to the heroes. Guess it wouldn't be a good idea to tell him that his father intended on giving him one for all. Kid, trust me, I'm the only one on your case that knows. Everyone is too preoccupied in finding a green-haired quirkless child than you. Believe me, I'm the main person on your case, 𝗧𝗍𝗃 said. Izuku didn't respond, choosing to look at the ground. Camilla still hung onto Izuku and she started petting him. She then turned and glared at Aizawa. So you know what they did to him then, here, she said angrily. 𝗧𝗍𝗃 sighed at her accusing tone. She's very protective and knows about his past. Yes, I do know what happened to him and I'm sorry that it happened in the first place and that little has been done, 𝗧𝗍𝗃 said. The girl snarled at Aizawa and pointed a finger dangerously at him. 𝗧𝗍𝗃 watches as BLD swirls around on the girl's hand and he sees it turn from metal back into BLD. Nothing has been done. They got off scot-free, just because they are children to top heroes. They got away with torturing him because he was quirkless. If they were lower-rank heroes or Izuku had a quirk, the story would be a lot different. Camilla yelled at him. Aizawa completely understands. In any other situation, the kids would have been sent to juvie and the parents would go to jail for neglect. But because Izuku's has all might for a father who possess a quirk that can be gifted to others and the fact that he is quirkless, nothing much can be really done. People having knowledge of a quirk like that existing is incredibly dangerous, and the fact it is a powerful one was well, that knowledge can allow All Might to keep those 5 out of jail. Nezu and Naomasa have given them punishment. Mandatory therapy, community service and volunteering at villain rehabilitation programs. If there is no improvement in their behavior or outlook on others, they are not permitted to go to UA, which is the only hero school they are not blacklisted from. Currently, from what the therapists and people attending the villain rehabilitation have said, that has actually changed is Katsuki. Izumi is close, but it seems that like the rest, she hasn't changed much. Katsuki is the only person who has changed. Believe me, they deserve a lot harsher punishment than what they received. But the fact that All Might has a passable quirk and him being the symbol of peace makes punishments almost impossible to give out, 𝗧𝗍𝗃 said. This only seemed to infuriate her more. 3. So those little SHT get to be heroes, she said angrily. She was about to say more, but 𝗧𝗍𝗃 interrupted her. No, and, wait, what? Camilla said, her tone completely changing. They have been given the chance to change themselves and the only one who has even come close to is Katsuki. Izumi may get in with time, but the other 3 most certainly aren't becoming heroes, 𝗧𝗍𝗃 said. The 2 teens were shocked. To their knowledge, they hadn't even been punished at all. Don't get them wrong, they still weren't happy with how little they were punished, but it was still more than they thought. Izuku gulped and finally looked away from the floor and looked up at 𝗧𝗍𝗃. So, you wanted to talk, he asked softly. Aizawa locked eyes with him and nodded his head. Yes, 3 questions and I'll let you 2 go, 𝗧𝗍𝗃 said. He crossed his hands over his chest and then raised one finger. First one, how did you obtain all for one? 𝗧𝗍𝗃 asked. Izuku thought for a second before giving his answer. Genetics. Toshinori has one for all when he had me. He was quirkless himself, so it explains how I was identified quirkless despite the extremely rare chance. Except because he had one for all, the DNA of his brother was in his body and I guess I just got the quirk. I'm not sure why I didn't develop it sooner, Izuku said. 6 𝗧𝗍𝗃 nodded his head. He wasn't sure if he was telling the truth, but at least now he has an answer. If that is the case, then perhaps the years of him being beaten down and made fun of for being quirkless probably put the subconscious thought of him quirkless in his head. Alright, question 2 is for your partner, Aizawa said, turning to the girl. The previously fierce girl suddenly becoming timid as she moved behind Izuku. This intrigued Aizawa. Who are you, Camilla? I know you're probably a criminal who was quirk discriminated against, which is why you and Izuku are close. But I need to at least know your identity, 𝗧𝗍𝗃 said. Camilla in response looked down to the ground. She raised her hands and timidly tapped her fingertips together. She sheepishly shook her head no. 𝗧𝗍𝗃 sighed in defeat. He wasn't going to get an answer out of her. Maybe he could ask Darby. 1, alright, moving on then. What is your living situation? 𝗧𝗍𝗃 asked. A makeshift home. Izuku answered like he wasn't even sure himself. Well, in the future you can always ask me if you need help of any kind, 𝗧𝗍𝗂𝗧 said. The two young teens seemed to perk up at this and look up at him confused. What? They both said in unison. 𝗧𝗍𝗂𝗧 sighed but kept his eyes on the two teens. You both need adult supervision as neither of you are in high school yet. But I won't push you. I know you both need time and space. So if you need anything, go to Darby or me and we'll be there, 𝗧𝗍𝗂𝗧 said. It looked like Izuku was going to say something but 𝗵𝗃𝗲 pulled on his shirt sleeve. He looked back and she whispered something to him. Izuku nodded his head and looked back over to 𝗧𝗍𝗂𝗧. Thank you 𝗧𝗍𝗂𝗧-kun, but I think it's time for us to go. Will we be able to talk with Darby? Izuku asked. 𝗧𝗍𝗂𝗧 shrugged. Sure, he's become my partner for the time being to make our lives easier, 𝗧𝗍𝗂𝗧 said. Izuku nodded his head and 𝗵𝗃𝗲 immediately started to fled. Izuku looked behind him as he watched her sprint away. By 𝗧𝗍𝗂𝗧 and Joke-san. Izuku yelled as he chased after her. Joke. 𝗧𝗍𝗂𝗧's eyes widen as he whaps his head around. Miss Joke was still there and she was staring at 𝗧𝗍𝗂𝗧. He groaned and face-palmed himself, hard. Dragging a hand down his face. How the F did he forget Miss Joke was there? And why the hell was so quiet throughout the entirety of that conversation? 6. So are you going to explain? Miss Joke said. 𝗧𝗍𝗂𝗧 pinched the bridge of his nose. She's not going to leave him alone. Hopefully just a bit of information will keep her mouth shut. He's going to need a coffee. Correction, a lot of coffee. 4. Alright, come to my place so I can get a coffee, 𝗧𝗍𝗂𝗧 said. 1. Your place, that's a step up in our relationship, 𝗧𝗍𝗂𝗧. Miss Joke smiled, wiggling her eyebrows at the tired man. He groaned loudly and walked away. Take things seriously, Joke, Aizawa said as he suddenly jumped down from the building. 2. I do, Joke yelled after him. There was a pause and 𝗧𝗍𝗂𝗧 knew what was coming as he started sprinting. 2. Marry me, Shota. 46. Izuku held Himiko's hand as they walked back home. Himiko was a bit frightened. 𝗧𝗍𝗂𝗧 was after her identity, a murderer. Even though she was no longer thirsty and hadn't killed anyone since Izuku had helped her. But that still didn't erase the fact that people are now dead because of her and they might not be as willing to look over the fact that she has killed several people. Izuku has been calming her down. He promised that nothing bad will happen to her and he'll make sure of it. That seems to have convinced, but the nerves have not left her. They now walk in silence as they entered the junkyard. Izuku does hope he can get the opportunity to get a teleportation quirk soon. It would save so much time. But as they walked, Izuku's mind wandered to something 𝗧𝗍𝗂𝗧 has said. They have been given the chance to change themselves and the only one who has even come close to is Katsuki. Even come close is Katsuki. Izuku hadn't been occupied with what his old life had been doing. Because doing so would stress him the hell out, but that's beside the point. When his bullies had walked into the cafe while him, Himiko, Nomi and Akito were talking was actually the first time he had even seen him before his disappearance. They do look like none of them really have changed. Only minimally at most. Well, all of them except for Katsuki. He no longer was ahead of everyone else, hunched and stomping as he walked along. He didn't have a permanent sneer on his face as he looked around for a possible fight or someone weak to pick on. He was calm and smiled at Izuku when they made eye contact. He most certainly had changed. Nomi had commented on it herself. She had said that all 5 goes to her villain rehabilitation program, with 𝗧𝗍𝗂𝗧 saying that as well. She said that Katsuki was the only one she liked while hating the rest. She didn't like Kotsumi because, and in her words, a 𝗵𝗃𝗲𝗧𝗵𝗃𝗲. She is always so full of herself and treats everyone else like slaves and pictures herself as a queen. She is angry all the time and becomes furious when someone tells her off, even the 𝗵 superior officer looking over her and the villains. She seems confused that they don't see her in the same way she sees herself and tries to degrade everyone else at every opportunity. Apparently she needs the class more than them. Shoto has always been emotionless and cold and Nomi doesn't like that. He's blunt and treats everyone like they are idiots. He stands in the corner silently and just stares into space. He doesn't try and cooperate with any of them or help unless the officer has explicitly told him to in detail. He just has the air of, I am better than you and you should know it. Something that no one in the program likes. Nomi doesn't like 𝗧𝗏𝗧𝗏 for similar reasons to Shoto. She often stands in the corner by herself and prefers not to interact with anyone. She looks shy and does act that way when talking to others, but everyone can tell she is very prideful. She always has an achievement that she gloats when she is talking to them. She obviously is prideful and often mutters something under her breath that is unfortunately too quiet to hear. But the main reason that Nomi hates her compared to Shoto is that she is obviously judging everyone. Shoto looks up at the ceiling and becomes unmoving while 𝗧𝗏𝗧𝗏 actively scans the room with narrowed eyes and looks over everyone, and the expression she wears is obvious that the thoughts she has aren't good. Then Izumi. Izumi is nice and always wears a smile. She helps wherever she can and does try her best. But what Nomi dislikes about her is the opinions she has. She has the mindset that the people in that room all deserve to be there. Don't get her wrong, Nomi wants to be there so she can get a second chance at life, and Izumi does believe that they can change. But she believes that they actively chose to be criminals instead of having nowhere else to go because no one else is willing to take or respect someone with blacked out eyes. She is very open with her opinions and is very forceful about it. For example, if she believes that someone can do it, she'll say it and encourage them. While if she thinks that someone can't do something, she is very firm and tries her best to get them to give up. While Katsuki is different. Nomi does have problems with him, but no one is perfect and it is clear to her that he is trying to improve. He does get angry very quickly and often swears at everything and everyone no matter the mood. But unlike the rest, he helps them and talks to them like human beings. He doesn't have the degrading attitude that most of them have and also does activities himself. He is supportive of them, even in his own way, but he still gets the message across and everyone has gotten used to him. He even defended them against a particular rude officer, one that the others didn't do anything about, and a few of them even agreeing with his comments. Everyone in the program likes Katsuki and he actually hangs out with a few of them outside of rehab. The personalities Nomi had said for his old friends fit them perfectly to Izuku. Everyone except Katsuki. He was very similar to Kotsumi. Loud, brash, temperamental and very degrading of others. King of the school and always on top no matter in what way. It was either best or nothing. Now, however, it seems as his entire personality has flipped. Well, maybe that's not right, his opinions and values have flipped. He still sounds like the same Katsuki. But what happened? The rest of his old friends stayed the same after he disappeared. Katsuki was always his worst tormentor at school, but at home it was like they were actually friends. He liked Aunt Mitsuki because she was one of the few people who didn't care that he was quirkless. He often was dragged to their home where he and Katsuki hung out. Kotsumi and Izumi would still hit him and threaten him, but Katsuki never did. Even locking the door sometimes and telling the girls to F off quite frequently. It was like being outside of school should be a safe place for him, but Izuku never understood why. Maybe he could ask now, because speak of the devil. Sitting on the step to get into the caravan was Katsuki Fing Bakugo. He sat on the step with his head down and looking at his phone. Izuku and Himiko stopped in place and looked at him, shocked that he was there. Katsuki had apparently heard them and looked up. He looked eyes with Izuku and then pocketed his phone. He stood up and started walking over to them. Himiko hissed at him as he walked closer. She stuck herself to Izuku and glared at him. Katsuki, however, was either undeterred or didn't care, as he didn't stop walking until he was a step away from them. Izuku had grown in the past few months from muscle building, but he had only gotten to 5 foot. Katsuki still had height on him and looking down at him. Izuku swelled up all the confidence he had and continued to look Katsuki in the eyes. Unlike other times, there was no malice, no pride or fury. They were calm, sad and slightly happy. Izuku, Katsuki had said. His voice was soft, but there was something in it that Izuku couldn't discern. Katsuki, Izuku responded. Izuku looked calm on the outside, but on the inside, he was freaking out. He felt like his heart was going to stop any second and his legs were going to give out. He was focused on the way Katsuki was breathing to see if he would suddenly attack. Strike him or explode. Katsuki then looked over to Himiko. She was baring her fangs and glaring into him with hatred and anger. Katsuki didn't seem to be affected by it as he looked back to Izuku. "It looks like you've been doing well for yourself," Katsuki said. He looked over to 𝗵𝗃𝗀, then behind him, his eyes going to the generator connected to the caravan. Izuku was confused by what he was doing but didn't let his guard fall. He had done so much to get where he was now, he wasn't going to let it disappear in a matter of seconds. "What the hell are you going here?" 𝗵𝗃𝗀 snarled. Izuku stepped back as he was pushed away by 𝗵𝗃𝗀. Izuku's eyes widened as she held a knife up to Katsuki's neck. Izuku looked over to Katsuki's, whose eyes were wide. Izuku could see fear in them. He then narrowed his eyes and opened his mouth. But no words came out. He then frowned and looked down. Izuku went to his hands and saw that Katsuki was squeezing them tight. Izuku was ready to form tentacles to prevent Katsuki from attacking 𝗵𝗃𝗀, but to his surprise, instead of raising his hands to blast 𝗵𝗃𝗀 with his quirk, he instead dropped to the floor. In response, 𝗵𝗃𝗀 stepped back and pointed her knife down at him despite how he wasn't looking. Katsuki's hands and knees were on the ground and he was looking at the floor. Izuku took the steps forward after nothing else had happened for a few seconds. "I'm sorry," Izuku heard in a whispered voice. "Sorry," Izuku repeated, not believing what he was hearing. "I'm so sorry, Izuku." "I'm so sorry," Katsuki said. Izuku's eyes widened as tears dropped onto the sand. Izuku was in shock. He's known Katsuki since diapers and not once has he ever heard him apologize. Not once did he think that Katsuki would ever apologize. "Katsuki," Izuku said in a sympathetic tone. Katsuki's fingers curled. He raised his hand up into the air and slammed it onto the ground. "I was a but too big to see over my own head. I caused this to happen to you. I'm so sorry, Izuku," Katsuki said, basically sobbing. Izuku looked down at Katsuki. He'd never seen him look so vulnerable and feeble. He's always been the alpha, better than everyone else. 37 Izuku took in a deep breath and walked over to Katsuki. He bent down and placed a hand on Katsuki's back. Katsuki tensed at the touch. "Katsuki, I forgive you," Izuku said. Instantly Katsuki's head shot up and anger flashed within them. 18 Are you mental? He yelled at Izuku. Izuku raised his hand in front of Katsuki's face to stop him from yelling. Izuku sighed and took in another breath. 11 Out of everyone else in your group, you're the only one who has changed. I've heard that from a hero on my case and people in your villain rehabilitation program. You are still rough around the edges, but that doesn't matter. Now I am not saying that what you did was good. It was horrendous and my life was horrible. But you were the only one nice to me while not at school and did actually protect me. I'm not entirely sure of your thought process, but I know it was changed by your environment. You were encouraged by your teachers to continue to hurt me, and everyone said you were the best. Why would you believe otherwise? I do understand that your relation with your mother isn't the best and that didn't help your attitude. I do forgive your Katsuki, only you in your group. Just don't turn back to what you were before," Izuku said. 14 Katsuki stared up at Izuku with wide eyes, tears running down his face. He looked down at the ground, his sobs returning at full force. Izuku got down and hugged Katsuki, which returned it immediately, pulling Izuku into a death grip. A few minutes passed before Katsuki finally calmed down, standing up and brushing himself up from the sand and dried tears on his face. Wiping them away, Izuku asked him a question. "Katsuki, how did you know where we lived?" he asked. Katsuki coughed into his hand and rubbed the back of his neck. "Well, as soon as you ran away, I started looking for you. I knew you would either have a place already prepared or living with someone else. I found out from Akito that you two lived in a junkyard and the closest one to where that cafe was here. So here I am. Knew it was you as soon as I saw all of that. No other homeless person could construct all of this stuff," Katsuki said, motioning to all of the connected to the caravan. The solar panels, generator, and a small shed with a bunch of items in it. Izuku chuckled and rubbed his neck sheepishly. Katsuki then looked over Izuku, taking in the odd qualities he has. "So what happened? Becoming a vigilante instead of a hero?" Katsuki asked. Izuku froze and his eyes became wide like a deer in headlights. He had completely forgotten that he no longer looked like what he did. White hair, golden freckles, purple patches of skin, metal teeth, red horns. It amazes Izuku how Katsuki was able to recognize him in the first place. How do you know about that? Izuku said. Katsuki scoffed and rolled his eyes. First of all, you are still in your costumes, Katsuki said, pointing to both him and Himiko. Izuku flushed and Himiko giggled. Secondly, you have horns and other things. The only person with those is the rumored kid that can take and give quirks. You don't have to tell me how you got it, Katsuki quickly added when he noticed Izuku freeze and looked at him with fear. Himiko then jumped forward and pressed a finger to his chest. You're not telling anyone about Izuku being here, are you? She accused, staring at him angrily. Katsuki raised his hands in a surrender action. Of course not. I would have called the police instead of waiting here all night, Katsuki responded. He then sighed and looked down. Everyone thinks it would be better to get you him as soon as possible, but I'm not a f***ing idiot. If you want to come home, you can. If you don't, you can do that too, Katsuki said. Thanks, Katsuki, Izuku replied. Katsuki nodded in acknowledgement. So what have you been doing? I heard you spend a lot more of your time with people from the villain rehab now, Izuku said. Katsuki nodded. Yeah, I try my best to avoid the other four. I can't stand to be around them anymore. So I thought I would hang out with other people who also want to change, while also figuring out what I want to do with my life now, Katsuki answered. Izuku raised an eyebrow. What do you mean, if you do well enough and get the go-ahead, you'll still be allowed to go to UA? Izuku said, confused. Katsuki sighed, shook his head. I don't deserve to be a hero, Izuku. They save people and inspire hope. I've only hurt others and caused fear. Like a villain. Hell, the only reason why I'm not in jail is because your dad is 𝗧𝗵𝗃𝗲. The damn prick, Katsuki responded, muttering the last sentence although it can clearly be heard. Izuku was shocked. Katsuki had always wanted to be a hero and would take nothing less. Actually, he wanted to be the #1 hero. But now, he was giving up. Katsuki had never been a quitter, doing everything in his power to win and push further. What? So you're giving up? Izuku said, shocked. Izuku, listen, I don't deserve to be a hero. I'm rude and have a temperament. Even if my morals change, I won't as a person, Katsuki groaned. No, you listen, Katsuki. You've been striving to be the #1 hero since 𝗵𝗃𝗲 diapers. You were given the chance along with Izumi, Shoto, Kotsumi, and Izumi, and you are probably the only one who will be given the option to be a hero. Have you ever heard of redemption? I can help you. No, I will help. Even if I have to drag you to the entrance exam and or take and use your quirk for you, Izuku said sternly, looking dead at Katsuki. 15 Katsuki looked at Izuku, stunned and surprised. But then the ash blonde smirked. Since when did you swear? He said with a nasty grin. Another hour had passed as Izuku tried to warm Himiko to the fact that Katsuki was a friend. She wasn't sold on the idea, but as long as he could convince her to not stab him to death, he'll take it. But right now, it is about past 3 and Katsuki had school. Alright, I'm heading to bed now. Katsuki, come in. You're not walking home, Izuku said. Katsuki rolled his eyes in response and nodded his head. The three walked into the caravan. Izuku went over to the bin bag and sat down onto it. He was about to instruct Katsuki to grab a spare sleeping bag but was interrupted. Himiko ran to the Izuku with a quilt behind her. She jumped onto, making the white-haired teen yell in shock and fright. She covered them both with the quilt and then she snuggled up to Izuku. Izuku was flushed a deep red as he looked down at Himiko, who had her eyes closed. 9 good night, lovebirds, Katsuki laughed, grabbing a sleeping bag and finding a spot to sleep. Izuku was currently watching the news and Himiko was sitting on a beanbag scrolling through her phone. Izuku has made up a sum of money of the last couple of months and managed to buy both of them some sweet new items. Phones were the big one. Izuku didn't exactly know how to make one, so they didn't have one, which made things incredibly difficult. But now that problem was solved. 7 Himiko seemed oddly fascinated with fashion trends and comedy things on YouTube. The second thing was internet. Izuku had been using the library's internet to get schoolwork done so he wouldn't be left behind and teach Himiko while he was at it. Izuku also found out that she was incredibly fair behind, but it did make sense. She did run away at age. Izuku and Himiko were both doing their own thing, but Izuku did notice something off about Himiko. He picked up quite a few of her cues on what was going on. She was a very expressive person and loud too. You would always know what she was thinking, if she was sad, angry, happy, or bored. You'd always know if she was bored. But right now, she was spacing out. Himiko only does that when she was thinking. She had an incredibly hard time figuring things out. Izuku turned away from the TV to look at her better. "Hey Himi," Izuku said, catching her attention. Instantly Himiko piped up and hummed and looked over to Izuku. All of her life returning instantly. She looked at Izuku expectantly. "What were you thinking about?" he asked. Himiko then zoned out again, looking up to the roof trying to collect her train of thought. Izuku waited patiently for Himiko to answer. She then looked down at Izuku. "Are we a couple, Izuku-an?" Himiko asked. At this question Izuku became a bright tomato. His mouth hung open. He tried to speak but the words died on his mouth. The question was sudden, which surprised Izuku. It's not like he hadn't thought about it. Himiko is someone he has liked for a while. Izuku gulped and pulled the front of his shirt outwards. He had to calm his nerves before he spoke again. "3WL, do you want to be?" Izuku asked. He was nervous even though he knows he shouldn't. She asked. The question about it would be preposterous if she had said no. He wouldn't be surprised though, everyone has been against him his entire life. But what he wasn't expecting was for Himiko to squeal. Izuku's eyes shot over to her only to catch a blur of something lunge at him. A sudden weight slammed into Izuku and he felt hands wrap around him. Izuku hit the floor and felt Himiko squeeze him tight. "3 We're a couple now," Himiko yelled. Izuku chuckled at her antics and embraced her back. But then something unexpected happened. Himiko gave Izuku a quick kiss on the lips. His eyes widened and he was stunned still. Himiko didn't realize this and sat up again, looking at Izuku. 12, can we go to the movies? She asked excitedly. Izuku was still stunned but managed to find the ability to speak. Yeah, Izuku answered. Himiko squealed and stood up and started hopping around. She then raced over to her bag which had all of her clothes. Izuku was still stunned and confused but he didn't mind. This was a good development. 5 Himiko walked through the streets mindfully. She isn't in broad daylight that often, especially considering her murderous past. When she is in broad daylight, she is always with Izuku. This is the first time that Izuku isn't with her. It does upset her, but he was currently talking with 𝗬𝗲 and Izawa. It's been about a month since they were officially dating, but according to Nomi and Akito they always were. Butterflies still flutter all over her stomach when they mention how her and Izuku are a cute couple. But today she was out with someone else, much to her dismay. Katsuki Bakugo was leaning against the wall of the huge shopping center complex. She had gotten his number, although begrudgingly, and he had texted her to meet him here without Izuku. She is still furious at him and the rest of his gang. She doesn't understand how Izuku forgave him, but it most certainly doesn't mean that she has to. Himiko really wants to shove him off a cliff. 3 With her arms crossed she walked over to Katsuki with a scowl. He saw her coming but didn't say anything. He just waited for her to arrive. Himiko stormed over with a cross expression. What do you want, Bakugo? She asked angrily. He sighed. It's Izuku's birthday next week, he responded. Himiko's eyes widened. She didn't know that, did her not tell her? Knowing Izuku, he probably thinks it wasn't important to say. Looking at your expression, I can tell you didn't know. So here's what I'm asking. I don't know what to get him, as he probably isn't as hero crazy as he once was, so I'd like your help. If you want to get him something, I'll pay for it, as long as it isn't too expensive. You don't want to be around me, so let's make this quick, Katsuki stated. Agreed, Himiko responded after slight hesitation. Katsuki nodded his head and turned away. Himiko followed silently while glaring into the back of his head. The two walked around the shop silently for the most part. Katsuki was the only one to make conversation about asking what Izuku would like. After looking around, they found a booth with people trying to give free trails on support items course. Himiko told Katsuki that would be something Izuku would love, which he agreed. He got one of them before walking off. Himiko still needed to find something for Izuku, and after walking past a certain store she knew what he would have wanted. Katsuki was confused as she told her to follow him in. "Are you sure he'd want this?" Katsuki asked. Himiko rolled her eyes and glared at him. The store they were in was a customizable hero memorabilia. Meaning if you wanted a figurine of a hero done a certain way, they do it. But they also have done vigilantes. Stain, Nightcrawler, and particularly Popstep. 16 Katsuki smiled when they gave the workers the money. The price was quite hefty, but his gift was free, so he thought it wouldn't be too bad if he put a bit of money into this. It was for Izuku after all. Himiko would have to come back after a week to pick it up, but she was fine with that. She set a reminder on her phone to make sure she wouldn't forget, because knowing herself, she would. They were close to the exit of the shopping center and Himiko couldn't wait to get away from Katsuki. Throughout their entire time together, Himiko has been fighting off the urge to punch Katsuki. "Katsuki," a voice shouted. Himiko froze. She has only heard that voice once, but she committed it to memory. Both her and Katsuki turned around and Himiko felt her urge to kill pile up once more. There walking towards them was Kotsumi and Izumi. Kotsumi looked furious while Izumi seemed jealous. Himiko's hands clenched as she looked at the two. Kotsumi stormed up to Katsuki, who wore a weak frown on his face. She then pointed angrily at Himiko. "Who the F is that Katsuki?" she said angrily. Himiko looked at Izumi, who seemed to be glaring at her. She snarled as she looked over to Kotsumi. "None of your business, bitch," she said angrily. Both girls were caught off guard at the anger at which Himiko said to them, but Kotsumi became infuriated. "Who do you think you're talking to?" she rebutted. Kotsumi took a step in her direction but was stopped by Katsuki pulling on her arm. "Calm down. Let's go, Toga," Katsuki responded. Kotsumi growled and ripped her arm out of her brother's grip. She turned around and glared at him and pointed at Himiko again. "Don't tell me you're dating that skank," she asked angrily. Himiko started to shake and her eyes started twitching. If this goes any further, she may just pounce on them. "I'm helping her get a preset for her boyfriend 𝗵𝘃𝗃. No, go do what you two were doing," Katsuki responded, trying to walk away, but an invisible force stopped him. He turned his head around and glared at Izumi, who was undoubtedly the person behind it. She was looking at Katsuki angrily. "Why have you stopped hanging out with us, Kachin? You're choosing to hang out with people like them instead of us. What happened?" she asked. He growled and looked away. "I'm trying to change now, let me go," Katsuki responded. Apparently Kotsumi didn't like that answer and gripped his arm. Katsuki growled and felt his arm starting to burn. Kotsumi was using her quirk too much, but the pain was definitely there. "No, you are coming with us and stopping this horse 𝗧𝗑𝗧 you're pulling. You're the main reason why Izuku ran away, so stop acting like it was our fault," Kotsumi hissed. The mention of Izuku seemed to have triggered Himiko. She lost all patience she was holding onto and rushed at Kotsumi. She gripped her stomach and flipped her over in a suplex. 16 The entire shopping center was stunned at the display at what just happened. They weren't really paying attention to the loud teens, but certainly the act of one of them suplexing the other did. Kotsumi was hurt on the ground and Izumi quickly went over to help her. Himiko was about to lunge herself at Izumi next, but Katsuki caught her. He then started to forcefully drag her away. "Let me go," Himiko hissed, elbowing Katsuki in the ribs in hopes that he would let her go. Katsuki growled but kept his grip firm. "No, if the police get involved, what do you think would happen? Izuku might get found, and I don't think you're an angel, so stop struggling and come on," Katsuki responded. She hissed but relented. As much as she hated it, he was right. If the police got involved, she would be arrested and they might find Izuku. Himiko didn't want that, so she let herself be dragged away. But mark her words, if she sees those two again, she is going to smash their faces into a wall. Darby sat outside of Aizawa's apartment. They just got back from talking with Izuku. Aizawa had to get Izuku to give 2 quirks back from girls he took them from. He knows that they probably deserved it, but they are young and no crimes are against their names. Izuku agreed and they found the 2 girls and gave them back. He didn't know what quirks they were but didn't really care. Currently Darby was smoking some weed. Aizawa doesn't like the fact that he does but isn't intending on stopping him. Aizawa wants him to go into some reform program to help him, but he isn't so sure. 𝗧𝗵𝗲 has been put in an improvement program before and his experience wasn't exactly great, so he's skeptical. 22 sighing, 𝗧𝗵𝗲 finished what he was smoking and went back inside. He has a lot to think about currently, but for now he is going to tease 𝗧𝗪𝗧. Walking inside he finds Aizawa in his sleeping bag drinking coffee. "You getting ready for Miss Joke?" 𝗧𝗵𝗲 asked with a smile. Aizawa groaned as his response, making 𝗧𝗵𝗲 laugh. "You know you like having her over," 𝗧𝗵𝗲 smiled. "I'd very much love to. Be put into a coma every time she is around," Aizawa said in a tired voice. At that a knock came at the door, making 𝗧𝗵𝗲 smile devilishly. "Well, I'll give you 2 lovebirds some space," 𝗧𝗵𝗲 said before walking away. 3 I hate you, Aizawa said, making 𝗧𝗵𝗲 laugh. Plus Izuku and 𝗵𝗃𝗃 were fast asleep on the bean bag together underneath a blanket. 𝗵𝗃𝗃 was hugging tightly to Izuku, who was uncomfortable but dealt with it as he liked being close to 𝗵𝗃𝗃. He was still new to the whole dating thing but enjoyed every second of it. Being official with 𝗵𝗃𝗃 while also being a vigilante duo was awesome. It is a shame he had to give back 2 of his quirks. Energy Spear wasn't a big loss. It was a powerful, but Izuku never really used it. Constellation, however, was upsetting as it was a powerful barrier quirk that worked well with Izuku because of all of his freckles. But he was fine with it. They were still children and it did seem like they learned a lesson while being quirkless. 8 But the past couple of months, however, have been great. His max quirk output is now 12 and he has gotten several more quirks. Izuku still has his quirks Bolt, Heavy Skeleton, Fat Inflammation, Pitch, Tentacles, Horn, and Retardant, which only gives 7 quirks to his maximum. He now also has Strong Impact and Tooth Missile, a strength quirk and another that combines well with Heavy Skeleton. But he has also retrieved 4 more quirks. Unfortunately, his last one is unusable, which is called Stasis, allowing him to completely freeze for 2 seconds and negate any damage he otherwise would take. But he would train until he got to use it. 12 But he still has another 3 he can use. Well, technically 5, but he combined them to have 3 instead of 5. His first new quirk is Rock Manipulation, which allows him to control rocks like comets. It destroys the area of where he rips the rocks out of the ground, so it isn't a quirk he would use often. His next quirk is a combination of 2. Sonic Scream and Bouncy Bullet. Sonic Scream allows them to shout out a burst of loud sound strong enough to push others away if they are too close. The second one emits a weak laser from the user's mouth that bounces around on flat objects until it hits something that isn't flat. Combining the quirks turned it into echo, making it so that the user emits a scream that bounces around on flat surfaces until it hits something that isn't flat. 11 The next one Izuku loves. The first quirk is called Scan. He has 5 digital pads on his fingertips that are connected by a dim lime light. If he touches a person or an object, any answer he has will be answered. The quirk becomes inactive for 5 minutes and Izuku can only have 1 question answered on an object every 24 hours. The quirk he combined it with was called Possession, which allows Izuku to control any object he wishes that he can see. When he combined his quirks, they became hacked. Unfortunately, the quirk became Contact instead of whatever Izuku sees but he can deal with. He can control whatever object he wants for any PRD of time and have any answer he has for the object answered. The quirk also works on people, but it only stuns them for a second before the possession wears off. Izuku and 𝗵𝗃𝗃 were still peacefully asleep. Well, one was, but Izuku didn't mind. He'd put up with it. But expectantly, Izuku woke. He groaned and held his head. Something loud interrupted his sleep. Izuku looked over to 𝗵𝗃𝗃, who was fortunately still asleep. For a criminal who has been on the run for almost 5 years, she is a heavy sleeper. The noise persisted and Izuku tried to figure out what it was. After a few seconds, Izuku realized it was knocking. He groaned again and forced himself to get up. It took a minute because of how tightly 𝗵𝗃𝗃 was clinging onto him and the fact that his arm was dead. Izuku managed to stand and tiredly trudged over to the door. Opening it, Izuku saw that Katsuki was on the other side. Also that the sky was pitch black, meaning it was either really late or really early. "Took you a fing while," Katsuki said with his signature scowl. Izuku sheepishly rubs the back of his head. He looks back into the caravan and looks at Himiko, who is still sleeping peacefully. He looks back to Katsuki. Well, Himiko likes to leech onto you, Izuku said. This made Katsuki cough, then laugh, giving Izuku his smirk. Look at you, ladies' man, he snarked. Izuku smiled and looked down, but then he furrowed his brow and looked back up at Katsuki. What are doing here? It's still dead at night, Izuku asked. Katsuki sighed and rolled his eyes. It's your birthday, Morin. I got you something, Katsuki said. Izuku's eyes widened. He did remember it was his birthday but thought little of it. He hadn't gotten a gift since Tuya died, other than Mitsuki getting him some katsudon after the day. Izuku watched as Katsuki reached into his pocket and grabbed out a small ticket or pamphlet of sorts. Katsuki raised it up towards Izuku, who cautiously grabbed it, still shocked that he was getting something. Izuku looked at it. It was a pamphlet that was about tinkering and making support items. He looked at Katsuki with wide eyes. It's a free trial that I signed you up for. I know it's SHT, but I paid for what Toga got you. I would have come in a better part of the day, but I'll be at your sister's birthday, Katsuki said. Izuku scowled at the mention of his sister but then paused. Wait, Himiko knew my birthday? Izuku asked. Now I told her and helped her get a gift. You'll get it later today or something. I would chat more, but I got to get home before the hag gets up for work, Katsuki said, shoving his hands back into his pockets. Izuku looked at him while he looked down. Tears were brimming from at his eyes before Izuku lunged at him and hugged him. Thank you, Kachin, thank you, Izuku said, hugging Katsuki tight. Katsuki was shocked. Especially at the name Kachin. Izuku hadn't called him that yet since he forgave him, but now he finally had. Katsuki smiled and hugged him back. 17, he wished he could go back in time and right the wrong he had done against Izuku. He wishes he can go back and slap the SHT out of his younger self, but it's too late now. All he could do was try and fix the wrongs in the present. For he won't F up this time. 7 Izuku-an. Izuku-an, wake up. Himiko yelled, trying to shake Izuku up. Izuku gasped at the sudden force of being shook and looked at Himiko, who was smiling widely. Happy birthday, Izuku. Himiko yelled loudly, smiling from ear to ear. Izuku smiled and hid the tears of happiness welling up behind his eyes. Morning, Himi, thank you, Izuku smiled. Himiko squealed, then jumped away. Wait here, I need to get you something, Himiko said as she bounced away and bent down into a drawer. Izuku's eyes widened when he remembered that Katsuki had told him about helping Himiko get him a gift. Izuku watched Himiko bounce back to him with a box in her hands. I got you something, she said excitedly. Izuku matched her enthusiasm. The present she was giving him was wrapped. Although Katsuki gave him his present first, being the first present he had gotten in years. But Himiko's was wrapped, making it seem more like an actual present. And it was from Himiko, making Izuku's heart squeeze. She handed the box to Izuku, who took it carefully, not wanting to destroy it. Open it, she said happily. Izuku smiled and wiped his eyes to hide the tears that were threatening to spill. Carefully he unwrapped the wrapping paper, wanting to savor the moment. Once he had removed the wrapping, a small white box was what was left. Slowly he opened the box that looked very well crafted, telling Izuku that whatever inside was special. Slowly he removed the lid and his eyes widened. It was an action figurine, like some of what his sister had. But this one was a custom-made. You can always tell that it isn't something that can be store-bought by the pose and craftsmanship. But what made this so obviously a custom figurine was that it was of him. Hope. To the tears that Izuku was trying desperately to keep him suddenly rocketed out. Izuku wailed and grabbed Himiko and pulled his face into her stomach and cried. Himiko hugged him tight as he cried. She pet his head as Izuku cried. Thank you, Himi, thank you, he said through sobs. Izuku and Himiko had started watching movies together, Himiko cuddling into Izuku's chest. Izuku had his vigilante figurine close to him. He loved it, and it made Himiko happy. But to their surprise, another knock was sounded at the door. Sighing, Izuku got up to see who it was. He knew it wasn't Katsuki, as he would be with his sister. It was probably 𝗬𝗲𝗍. He opened the door but was surprised on who was on the other side. 𝗬𝗲𝗍 was indeed there, but so was two other people. Eraserhead and Miss Joke. He didn't get to ask why they were there as Joke yelled. "We brought cake for the birthday boy," she yelled. Izuku was shocked. "Why were they here?" 𝗬𝗍𝗫 chuckled and walked forward, ruffling his hair. "3 You need cake for your birthday snow cone. Now let's celebrate," 𝗬𝗍𝗫 said. Himiko came up to them and gave Miss Joke a hug. Despite only knowing her for a short while, they immediately bonded. The group all ate cake and laughed. Well, except Eraserhead, but he gave Izuku some cash before crashing in his sleeping bag. But Izuku was happy. The happiest he has felt in years. He feels loved. Having his new girlfriend by his side. An older brother figure with him, a fun auntie and a grumpy uncle. He couldn't be happier. Izuku and Himiko went out on patrol that night. It was oddly quiet that night, however. Izuku and Himiko had yet to find any crime except for a few drunk people causing a ruckus, but nothing of concern. This did concern Izuku. "Why isn't there anything?" Izuku asked, stopping on a roof. Himiko paused as well, being faster and ahead of him still even after all of his quirks and months of patrolling. "She is just too goddamn fast. Isn't that a good thing? No villains on the street, it's like they know it is your birthday," Himiko said happily. Izuku frowned as he looked around. Something felt off, and whatever it was, he didn't like it. "Crime doesn't disappear, something is happening and I don't like it," Izuku said. He felt the hairs on stand up. He suddenly felt fear. Something was happening, and whatever it was scaring him. Instinctively, he made himself bigger with his iron bones. He allowed electricity to run around him. He made his horns larger as well as his teeth and nails, making them into claws. "Are you okay?" Himiko asked. Before Izuku could answer, however, he was punched. Izuku yelled as large arms gripped him tight, preventing him from moving. He knew something was off, but why did he feel an immense amount of fear? "I have caught you, villains. Surrender peacefully or I will take you down forcefully," a voice boomed. "That's why." Izuku moved his head up to look at the monster holding him. It was his father, All Might. He wasn't smiling, but glaring down at Himiko. Himiko stared daggers at All Might. If looks could kill, he would have wished he was never born. Let him go, you oaf," she screamed. Himiko ran at All Might, cutting her arm. BLD sprayed out and she instantly turned it into fire. All Might yelled quickly but then snapped his fingers. The fire was quickly blown out. All Might then grabbed Himiko. He picked her up by the face and then slammed her onto the ground. The ceiling of the roof cracking at the force. Izuku could only stare in shock. Himiko was crushed into the ground and all he could do was watch. The father, who neglected him and gave his bully of a sister everything she wanted, just hurt his girlfriend. Now all he could see was red. "How dare you!" Izuku yelled. He grew even more, pushing his heavy skeleton quirk to its limits. He reeled his arm back and slammed the back of it into All Might's face. He activated Strong Impact, using one of its 10 uses. All Might yelled as he flew back. He was knocked off of the roof and slammed into the ground. Izuku quickly went over to Himiko, who was standing back up with hatred on her face. "Himiko, I need you to run," Izuku said quickly. Himiko looked at him perplexed. "And let you fight him alone?" "No way," Himiko responded. He shook his head. "No, we can't win against him. We need to run away. I can get away with Bolt, but I need you to go. Please, Himi." "I can't lose you," Izuku said, almost desperately. Himiko looked at his pleading eyes before sighing. She nodded her head, although reluctantly. She turned around and hopped off the roof. Izuku sighed, but he was filled with nothing but rage. He got up and turned around. He turned around to the edge of the roof where he knocked All Might off. However, the number 1 hero had already got up. Izuku didn't have time to process as the 7-foot-tall man jumped up and punched him right in the face. Izuku was flung into the air and flew for quite the distance. He saw All Might chasing after him, flying over to Izuku to punch him into the ground. However, Izuku turned into a bolt of electricity and zoomed into the ground to avoid All Might. A few seconds after, All Might landed on the ground. Izuku turned around and matches All Might's glare. "I'm going to ask you once, villain. Where is Izuku?" All Might asked. Izuku felt rage boil in his BLD. He felt his bones shift as his size altered. His bones stretched to the outside of his body, making Izuku grow. It looks like he is in a mecha suit. Izuku is in immense amount of pain as his body strains as he reaches the limits of his quirk, but he couldn't care less. He has made himself as large as All Might, and he wanted his father to feel pain. 6. Why does it matter to you? The world may not know what kind of monster you are, but I do, Izuku snarled. All Might frowned. He got into a stance and looked ready to attack. Izuku did the same. I gave you a chance, villain, All Might said in a threatening voice. Izuku scoffed as he stared him down. All Might then lunged forward, reeling a punch. Izuku reeled back a punch of his own. He activated strong impact and their fist collided. An air wave burst from their fists, making the glass of the buildings around them shatter. Izuku was about to punch him again, but All Might was faster. The force of his punch dented the iron of Izuku's chest and the force pushed him back 20 feet. His feet dragged across the ground, ruining the road, but he stayed standing. Izuku reformed the dent in his iron with his quirk, then glared at All Might. I can only match him with strength when I use strong impact. I only have 8 uses of that quirk left, so I have to be careful how I use them. He is a lot faster and can probably punch me before I can even react. I need to try something else, Izuku thought. 3 electricity swirled around Izuku once more. All Might charged at him again, but Izuku turned into electricity. Izuku then re-emerged as he and All Might passed. He extended out his claw for a hand and swiped All Might's ribs. He heard All Might yell in pain as he ran past. Izuku smiled in triumph. He looked behind him to see his father clutching his side as BLD paws down. A helicopter was watching their fight. The news was prepared for this when they saw All Might out running along and was waiting for a fight. They were broadcasting this to the entire nation, on the news for the Japanese families. The Yagis, Bakugos, and Todorikis were all next to each other on the couch as they watched the fight. They were all celebrating Izumi's birthday, when suddenly Toshinori got up and left. They left a slice of cake for Izuku. Now they were watching the news as All Might, the #1 hero, fought the vigilante Hope, who possessed multiple quirks. The successor of All for One. Here we have our symbol of peace fighting the elusive vigilante Hope. But where is his partner in crime, Carmilla? The news reporter said. Izumi watched with her friends as her father fought the successor of his arch-nemesis. Shouldn't Izuku be the one fighting them? The successor for One for All to defeat All for One. She looks down sadly at the memory of her brother. He should be with them right now, but because of her, he might never come home. But she wouldn't give up. She looked back up at the television with determination. Come on, Dad, she whispered. Katsuki was standing up with his arms crossed, trying to hide his worry. He knew what quirks Izuku had, and even with all of them, he couldn't match the sheer power All Might had. He was the only one in this room that knew that Hope was Izuku and had All for One. He hoped he will be all right. 5 Izuku yelled as he was hit by a barrage of punches by All Might. He was launched back and slammed into a wall. His iron bones were cracked and bent in ways they shouldn't be. He was in so much pain, but he refused to give up. He activated fat inflammation and his body glowed gold. The very next second, he was completely healed. However, his 7-foot-tall armor of iron had gone down as he couldn't hold it. Izuku saw All Might coming towards them again and screamed. A ball of sound bounced around the walls of the buildings. Izuku then fired his iron teeth as missiles at All Might. All Might was surprised but was about to jump up into the air and avoid it, but Izuku stopped him by forming 2 tentacles from underneath All Might and holding him there. All Might yelled in pain as iron teeth missiles exploded on him, then was launched into the air when Izuku's scream hit him. Izuku turned into electricity to catch up to his father. When All Might was about to hit the ground, Izuku untransformed himself and increased the size of his arm. He then activated strong impact and All Might slammed into the ground. 6 Izuku was sure he knocked him out, but a fist punched him in the face. Izuku was then launched high into the air. All Might groaned, his body was bloody and he was running out of time. But he was determined to take Hope down. He squatted, then jumped into the air after Izuku. Izuku was in a delirious state after being hit in the face incredibly hard. So much that he didn't register 𝗬𝗍𝗫 coming up next to him. 𝗬𝗍𝗫 put his hands together and lifted his fists above his head. He then slammed them down, sending Izuku flying to the ground at light speed. Izuku hit the ground hard. His body was broken and he was bleeding everywhere. All he could feel was pain. He activated fat inflammation to heal him. It worked and he was fine. But he was tired. The last bit of energy he had left was healing himself so he wouldn't die. He felt small and vulnerable as a loud thug sounded next to him. A hand grabbed his face and squeezed it tight, making Izuku yell into the palm. "Surrender, villain. You have lost," 𝗬𝗍𝗫 said. Izuku couldn't see, but he wanted to kill him. But he couldn't move. He was too weak, too tired to anything. He could only lay limply in 𝗬𝗍𝗫's hand as he could do nothing else. "And it looks like our symbol of peace is victorious again," the news reporter yelled. The Yagis, Todorikis and Bakugos cheered 𝗬𝗍𝗫. Minus Katsuki and Mitsuki. Katsuki's eyes were wide as he became worried for his friend, only for something unexpected to happen. "Let go of him," a voice yelled. It sounded like 𝗬𝗍𝗫, the loudness of how it boomed across the city. 𝗬𝗍𝗫 looked to the side only to be met with himself flying at him. He was punched in the face and flew away, slamming into a wall. The new 𝗬𝗍𝗫 then bent down and picked Izuku up in their arms. They then turned around and jumped away, getting as far away as they could before the other 𝗬𝗍𝗫 got back up. The Yagis, Todorikis and Bakugos could only look at the television in shock at what just happened. Katsuki was shocked too, but then secretly smirked when he understood what just happened. What was that?" the news reporter said. Izuku groaned as he got up. His stomach was hungry and he was really thirsty. As soon as he got up, Himiko rushed up to him and gently laid him back down. "No, you're still injured, lay back down," she ordered. Izuku didn't bother arguing as he just did what she told him to. "What happened?" he asked. "Well, 𝗬𝗍𝗫 arrived on our patrol and you told me to run away. You fought him but lost, but not after spilling his BLD everywhere. I drank some of it and turned into him and punched him away and took you home," Himiko said. She then held up a vial of BLD. "I also got some of his BLD, for just-in-case purposes," Himiko said mischievously, winking at him. Izuku laughed but then started coughing. Himiko quickly got up and grabbed him a glass of water. Izuku took it with a thank you and started to drink it. "They're going to have to stop patrolling for a while until he can go out again. I wonder if I put 𝗬𝗍𝗫 in a hospital." 𝗧𝗵𝗵 walked down the street to a place he hasn't been to in a long time. He's nervous on the inside but has managed to conceal it on the outside. It's a skill that he's had to learn. Something that's now incorporated into his personality now. He's forgotten how to act himself, but it isn't entirely a bad thing. He might not have survived the street if he isn't who he is now. 𝗧𝗵𝗵 had his hands in his pockets as he walked. It feels surreal to him, walking out in daylight. He isn't even hiding his face, which is having him receive looks from onlookers. But right now he didn't care. His steps felt a bit lighter than normal as he approached a house he hasn't seen in a very long time. 𝗧𝗵𝗵 stood at the front for a while, building up the courage to finally walk down. With his appearance, he probably looks like a creep, but he could care less about what other people think of him. 𝗧𝗵𝗵, faking courage, finally walked towards the door. He took a breath and raised his and knocked on the door. He hid behind his facade of cool and uncaring, but inside his body was screaming at him. His nerves were bubbling and he was worried. 𝗧𝗵𝗵 waited patiently for the door to open. His breath hitched when he heard footsteps approaching the door. Holding his tongue, 𝗧𝗵𝗵 watched as the door opened, revealing a woman behind it. She was slim and young. Early 20s. She had gray ears with mostly gray hair, having red triangles mixed into parts of it. She had thick black glasses and she was dressed in a comfortable floral pattern sweater with an apron. She gasped when she saw 𝗧𝗵𝗵, which he expected. He is pretty horrifying to look at. The woman stumbled back at the sight of him, he hand gripping 𝗧𝗓𝗓 on the door and then used it as a shield from him, poking her head out to look at him. "I'm not as scary as I look," 𝗧𝗵𝗵 said in a tired voice. He sighed and brought hand through his hair and took a deep breath. He wasn't about to look weak, no matter how nervous he feels. The woman nodded shakily but still looked uncertain. 𝗧𝗵𝗵 didn't blame her. Removing herself from the door, but not quite. She looked 𝗬𝗵 in the eyes. "Well, can I help you?" the woman asked with a slight stutter. 𝗬𝗵 sighed as he looked up and around the house. So many memories here, but almost all are bad. He tries to quell the fear inside of him to look snark and scary on the outside, or brave in this situation. "Don't know. Just looking around to see how things are going. I used to live here. No," 𝗬𝗵 said. This was his hint to the woman. Or better known to him, his sister Fuyumi. After getting some information from both Miss Joke and Eraserhead on Endeavor's and Ice Queen's schedule. Which is why he is at their residence now. Fuyumi and hopefully Natsuo should be the only ones home as Shoto and Ẓayato are doing their villain reform program thingy. Fuyumi looks at him oddly. Concern leaks into her expression as she looks over him. Her hands grip the door firmly as she peers over him. "Sorry sir, but this house was built for my parents. We have been the only residences here, so I believe you are mistaken," Fuyumi replies. 𝗬𝗵 turns to Fuyumi and gives her an "Are you kidding me?" look. 𝗬𝗵 sighs and brings his face over his face, composing himself. 𝗬𝗵 looks around the house again. "Nope, I've got the right place. 10 years ago was the last time I was here, I think," 𝗬𝗵 says, putting his hands on his hips and looking around like he doesn't know what's going on. But to his dismay and disappointment, Fuyumi shook her head. She started to close the door a bit more, irritating 𝗬𝗵 slightly. "Sorry sir, but that's impossible. I've lived in this house all my life." "You've never lived here," she answered, shutting the door a little but more. 𝗬𝗵 groaned in defeat. He thought his sister was smarter than this. Maybe it was the fact that everyone believes he committed suicide. He did do it in the middle of the house. "Seriously, Yumi? Does this help?" 𝗬𝗵 said angrily. He raised his right hand and a burst of bright blue flames emitted from it. Fuyumi's eyes widened and she stumbled back in surprise. Her eyes showed both horror, surprise, hope and unbelievability. She put a hand to her mouth and stepped back, shaking her head from side to side, refusing to believe what 𝗬𝗵 had just told her. "No," she said, still in completely shock and befuddlement. I watched him die," Fuyumi said, tears starting to roll down her cheek. 𝗬𝗵 sighed and put his hands down into his pockets. 5. "I know it is hard to believe. But if you need proof, ask one of our parents. I was interrogated about a week ago about Izuku Yagi," 𝗬𝗵 said. In a moment of bravery, but on the inside desperation. 𝗬𝗵 gave the best smile he could and stretched out his arms in a gesture of wanting a hug. "I'm sorry I left, especially like that. But I never forgot," he said softly. Fuyumi stared at him. She still had her hand over her mouth, but it was quivering. Her entire body looked like it would topple over any second. Tears had rolled down her face and a sob cracked out from her. She then ran to 𝗬𝗵, wrapping her hands around him and cried. 𝗬𝗵 embraced her and held her tight, patting her head. "I missed you," 𝗬𝗵 heard her say through muffled sobs. If 𝗬𝗵 could cry he would be bawling right now, but he burned his tear ducts of a long time ago. He sighed and hugged her tighter. 7. "I missed you too, Yumi, and I am very sorry," 𝗬𝗵 said weakly as he tried not to cough out the unused tears that he can't produce. Eventually 𝗬𝗵 was taken inside and he sat with Fuyumi at the kitchen table. He got a glass of water to have and the two started to talk, catching up with each other. "So have you become a teacher? You finished uni last year, right?" 𝗬𝗵 asked, taking a sip of his water. Fuyumi smiled at him as she fiddled with her fingers. "Yeah, I'm a kindergarten teacher now and I love it," Fuyumi answered. She sighed and put a strand of hair behind her ear. 5. "You have been doing illegal things, haven't you?" Fuyumi asked. 𝗬𝗵 frowns but nods his head. "Nothing to get me more than a year. I mainly do abuse things and info broking. Information and stuff," 𝗬𝗵 answers, swirling the water in his glass. Fuyumi sighs and crosses her arms over each other, putting her elbows on the table. "What happened to you? Why didn't you come home?" and she pauses for a second, collecting herself. "How are you alive?" she asked. 𝗬𝗵 doesn't say anything for a while, seemingly in thought as he came up with an answer. 𝗬𝗵 then groaned, stretching in his chair but not facing Fuyumi when he sat back normally. "I'm not really alive, am I?" 𝗬𝗵 laughs hollowly. He outstretched his arms, showing more of his burned skin to Fuyumi. "I look like a corpse that wasn't cremated properly," 𝗬𝗵 jokes, shaking his head. For why I never came home, 𝗬𝗲𝗍 said, before looking up at the ceiling. Fuyumi can see the pained expression on his face. There are multiple reasons for why I didn't come back, 𝗬𝗲𝗍 said. He waits for a while. The air becoming tense. Fuyumi watches 𝗬𝗲𝗍 or Tuiya's face. He is neutral for the most part, but his eyes narrow for a few seconds. She watched one time as his face scrunched up and bile in disgust. I was scared. Scared of Enji, scared of Rei. I was scared of how I looked and what you and Natsuo would have thought of me. I was angry and I wanted an escape. Spiteful and just hatred of the 4 out the 6 people who live here, 𝗬𝗲𝗍 said with mixed emotions. Fuyumi noted the fact he called their mom and dad by their actual names. How are you alive? Fuyumi asked again. 𝗬𝗲𝗍 just shrugs and takes another sip of his water. He sighs as he puts it down before leaning back into his chair, putting an arm over the back across it. Honestly, I don't really know myself. It may be because of the fact I'm unnaturally cold. Hence why my quirk gave me freezer burns instead of regular ones. All I remember is waking up with blue fire all around me and becoming terrified of the punishment I'd receive. I climbed out of a window and ran. The next thing I know, I'm in an alleyway in incredible pain, 𝗬𝗲𝗍 answers. Fuyumi nods sadly. She knows that her brother went through horrible torture both physically and mentally. This is all insane to take in, a brother she was so sure. She watched commit suicide a decade ago. But here he is, looking completely different and no longer acting like the same timid yet determined brother she loved. But she knows this is him. Hey, didn't you say that you were interrogated about Izuku, right? Fuyumi asked. 𝗬𝗲𝗍 nods his head. Well, do you know anything? Everyone is worried about him, Fuyumi says. 𝗬𝗲𝗍 frowns at that and grunts. The kid's fine. Better than he ever has been actually, and that is all I am going to say, 𝗬𝗲𝗍 says in a low voice. Fuyumi nods and accepts his answer. Tuiya has always been close with Izuku. In fact, she is pretty sure that Tuiya actively searched him out after his quirkless diagnosis. Where are you now then? Fuyumi asks. I'm living in the house of an underground hero. His name is Eraserhead and he's the main man on the job for Izuku. He is trying to convince to go to all these reform programs, but I don't know. The last time I did a program, didn't end well, 𝗬𝗲𝗍 said nonchalantly. Fuyumi wasn't sure what he meant by program, but what she gathered from his sentence, it seems like this. Eraserhead guy is trying to get him into being a hero. Tuiya has always wanted to be a hero. Dad always told him he would being his successor and eventually become the #1 hero. He was told all of this. But he then told he was weak, pathetic, a failure. Fuyumi isn't sure how much of her original Tuiya is still in there, but looking at him now, she believes he is still the soft bear he always has been. I can't control what you do with your life. But if doing this program gets me my brother back, then please try, Fuyumi says, not quite pleadingly but in a sad tone of voice. 𝗬𝗲𝗍 looks at her shocked slightly, then looks down and sighs. Fuyumi smiles at that, he's thinking about it. Here Yumi, do you know who is that? A male voice said. 𝗬𝗲𝗍 instantly knew who it was. He didn't turn around to meet them, deciding to finish his cup of water. Fuyumi turned to her brother Natsuo, who was glaring at the shifty-looking man. She nervously looked at 𝗬𝗲𝗍, who looked back at her. He winked at her and smiled devilishly. She cursed him under her breath before smiling sheepishly over to her brother. Well Nat, this may sound crazy but this is Tuiya, she says nervously. Natsuo looks taken aback. He takes a closer look at 𝗬𝗲𝗍 and shakes his head. 𝗬𝗲𝗍 can feel his stare and raise his hand and gives a small wave above his head without turning around. Hey Nat, he said before finishing his water. Natsuo snarls and looks over to Fuyumi. He raises his hand and jars it in 𝗬𝗲𝗍's direction. Don't tell me you believe this SHT, Fuyumi. We literally watched Tuiya die, Natsuo answers with anger. Fuyumi wasn't sure how to respond. She looked over to 𝗬𝗲𝗍 pleadingly. 𝗬𝗲𝗍 finishes water and sighs. He stands up and turns around to face Natsuo. Natsuo gasps and looks at 𝗬𝗲𝗍 in shock after seeing the scar on his lower jaw. I know about the secret door at the back through the bushes that you like to take to look at the stars to help with nightmares. You sleep with a teddy named Mr. Paddington. You thought girls had pays until you were almost 7, 𝗧𝗵𝗃 answers the last one with a smirk. Fuyumi scoffs and suppresses a chuckle by covering her mouth with her hand. Natsuo stares at him wide eyes before pouting and glaring at him again. 8. Well, how do I know she didn't just tell you all of that? Natsuo accuses. 𝗧𝗵𝗃 drops his smirk and sighs. He looks to the ceiling diagonally and rubs the back of his head with his hand. He seems to be questioning whether or not he should say. 𝗧𝗵𝗃 dropped his head and put his hands in his pockets. The night before I disappeared. I went out through the secret door. Natsuo's eyes widened once he heard that. I came out to you, watching the stars. I went over to you and sat down. We talked for a bit, before I broke. I cried into you, Natsuo, asking why I existed, why I couldn't be seen worthy enough as their son. Why I couldn't have possessed Shoto's or Zyato's quirk instead of mine, 𝗧𝗵𝗃 answered. 5. Natsuo just stared at them with wide eyes. 𝗧𝗵𝗃 looked at him with a monotone expression the entire time. Natsuo looked to Fuyumi, who looked at the two, shocked. Natsuo looked back to 𝗧𝗵𝗃, who was looking down, and sad. He then smiled sadly and raised his arms in a gesture for a hug. I'm sorry I left, Nat, but I promise I never forgot. I came to as many of your soccer matches as I could, 𝗧𝗵𝗃 said. 6. Wait, really? Natsuo asked. 𝗧𝗵𝗃 smiled, earnestly. You won the national championships and got man of the match in 2015, 𝗧𝗵𝗃 smiled. Natsuo nodded his head, a tear rolled down his cheek. He then tackled his brother in a hug which made 𝗧𝗵𝗃 laugh as he was shoved back into the table. Fuyumi got up and joined the hug too. The three cried minus 𝗧𝗵𝗃 together as they were reunited after a decade. 3. 𝗧𝗵𝗃, Natsuo, and Fuyumi hung around the dining table and talked for ages. They laughed and told each other about their lives, catching up with all of their missed times. The three all completely missed the turning of a key and walking of footsteps. A voice all shocked them. Who the hell is that? Zyatow said, pointing at 𝗧𝗵𝗃. 𝗧𝗵𝗃 was facing away from them, but his eyes immediately twitched. Fuyumi and Natsuo's eyes widened as they turned to the kitchen door. Their parents had their eyes wide in shock as they looked at 𝗧𝗵𝗃 while the twins glared at the man. 𝗧𝗵𝗃 looked over to the clock on the wall and internally cursed. He wasn't supposed to be for that long. He lost track of time. Well, looks like I overstayed my welcome, 𝗧𝗵𝗃 said, standing up from the table. He hugged both Natsuo and Fuyumi. Sorry for the intrusion, 𝗧𝗵𝗃 says with a forced smile as he turns around to look at the four in the doorway. The twins glare at him while Enji looks down at the floor. His mother, however, is looking at him disbelief and sadness. The first time 𝗧𝗵𝗃 has ever seen his mother not look horrified at him. She takes a step forward and the forced smile 𝗧𝗵𝗃 had was instantly removed as he now tried to not snap at her. 𝗬𝗧𝗏, is it really you? She asks. She reaches out a hand, but all the composure that 𝗧𝗵𝗃 tries to keep washes away once she got too close. His face contorts into fury as he slaps her hand away. It's 𝗧𝗵𝗃 to you, he seethes. Rei takes a step back and grabs her hand. The twins instantly rush up. Zyatow going to her mother, who is now crying, and Shoto is now in front of her with anger on his face. The hell is wrong with you? The police will be on their way, Shoto says sternly. 𝗧𝗵𝗃 twitches at the sight of him but manages to smile threateningly. Cool, I'll also give the evidence on who you removed 3 of Izuku's toes, he said creepily. Shoto's eyes widen and so do Zyatow's, looking up from her mother and looking at her twin and 𝗧𝗵𝗃. 𝗧𝗵𝗃 laughs as he storms past them. He was expecting his father to block him, but he simply moved to the side and let 𝗧𝗵𝗃 pass. 22. 𝗧𝗵𝗃 ignored it, however, and left the room by lifting the middle finger over his head. He walked to the door and opened before slamming it shut. 𝗧𝗵𝗃 groaned as he stomped away, wiping his face with both of his hands before shoving them into his pockets aggressively. 𝗧𝗵𝗃 was beyond cessed, seeing those 4 completely dissipated any composure he had. But he couldn't deny, seeing Fuyumi and Natsuo again put his heart at ease. Izuku was still in bed. Himiko is forcing him to rest, no leaving the house and letting her take care of him. Izuku was kind of worried about it. It's not that he didn't trust Himiko, the exact opposite. But she extremely childish and a bit of an airhead. But to his surprise, she was very good at taking care of him and making him feel good. 21. He shouldn't really have been surprised. Himiko survived on the street for 4 years, she knows how to take care of someone. for it had been 3 days since his fight with All Might. His injuries still ache and he finds it hard to stand. But he knows that his father is having a worse time if the injuries he saw from the TV any indication. He is also trying to gain a bit more fat. It's hard for him because of his extremely hard metabolism, but it allows him to survive fatal attacks like when All Might smashed him into the ground. So it is worth it. Currently him and 𝗵𝗃 were on the beanbag eating katsudon. 𝗵𝗃 has no clue on how to cook, so she ordered it. Izuku was confused on how, but apparently she just had them deliver it to the side of a street. Sneakily, she retrieved it and returned home for them to eat. Right now, the duo are watching comedy shows. Izuku does find it funny, but he mainly watches it. Because of the laughter, 𝗵𝗃 cackles at almost every joke. It warms his heart. Unfortunately, a knock came at the door. 𝗵𝗃 sighed but stood up and opened it. She smiled when she saw that it wasn't Katsuki like she thought. "Hi, Eraserhead." 𝗵𝗃 yells happily, bouncing on the heels of her feet. Izuku paused the show and looked over to the door. Why would Eraserhead be here alone? He'd only do it if he had something important to say. Eraserhead gives a lazy wave and looks past 𝗵𝗃. "Is Izuku awake?" he asked. "Yeah, I'm up, Eraser," Izuku said from the beanbag. He nodded his head and looked at 𝗵𝗃. "Is he doing all right?" he asked, and 𝗵𝗃 nodded. "Still recovering, but he's a-okay," 𝗵𝗃 said happily. Eraserhead nodded. "Great, but I have to take you somewhere for a meeting. Since Izuku's injured, I'll have to drive you there," Eraserhead stated. 𝗵𝗃 blinked and tilted her head to the side. "Why would we need to go somewhere?" 𝗵𝗃 asked skeptically. Eraserhead sighed and moved his finger in, a come closer motion. 𝗵𝗃 did it, bending forward, and Eraserhead whispered something in her ear. Whatever it was, seemed to brighten her up. She started bouncing up and down and quickly ran to Izuku, picking him up bridal style. "6, let's go," she yelled excitedly. Izuku became a blushing mess and 𝗵𝗃 bounced out of the caravan with him in her arms. "Wait, where are we going?" Izuku stuttered, incredibly flustered. "You'll see," Eraserhead responded in a monotone voice. Neither of the two gave Izuku any answers. They both hopped into Eraserhead's old car. When 𝗵𝗃 questioned about it, he answered that he rarely had anywhere he needed to go that was far away. If it was, he could jump across the roofs pretty easily. Izuku still just sat there awkwardly as they drove to their destination. One Izuku was extremely confused and slightly scared. But then he saw it. The signature logo and building. The large glass building shaped in the letter H. Izuku's eyes sparkled in excitement as they pulled up to the front gate, the logo of UA at the top. Izuku's smile rivaled the sun in that moment. I'm really here. It's so amazing in person. Wait, why are we here?" Izuku suddenly questioned. Eraserhead ignored him and got out of the car. "Carry him and follow me, will you?" he asked 𝗵𝗃. He nodded her head excitedly and quickly dragged Izuku out of the car. 𝗵𝗃 skipped along with Izuku in her arms. Izuku was blushing madly. But he tried to put his mind elsewhere, like, why were they here, and why is this building so big, and why do they have so many rooms? Why the doors so large but the desks inside so tiny? It doesn't make sense if they were to have a big student but tiny desks. For then Eraserhead walked up to a door. He stood there for about a second, which confused Izuku for a moment before the door suddenly swung open. Izuku's eyes widened at it. He wanted to question, but for some reason he had the feeling his question would be answered in a moment. 𝗵𝗃 followed Eraserhead inside and Izuku was shocked at what he saw. In the center of the room, sitting at a desk, was someone Izuku never thought he'd see. A small white animal sat in a chair. There was a small scar over their left eye and the species of them was unidentifiable. It looks like a bear, dog and rat all at once. Izuku knew who that was immediately, Principal Nezu. The smartest being in the world. "Hello Izuku and Toga, please have a seat," Nezu smiled innocently at them. 𝗵𝗃 flinched at the mention of her name. But she took a deep breath and smiled, continuing on. She walked over to the two chairs that were obviously left out for them. She sat Izuku down, then sat down herself. "Well, hello, I must say that fight you had with All Might was spectacular," Nezu remarked, pouring a cup of tea. "Thanks." Izuku said awkwardly. Nezu then held out the teapot in his hand to them. Tea, he asked. Both Himiko and Izuku politely denied. Nezu nodded his head yet still smiled innocently. He then looked back over the two, putting his paws together gently. Well, I bet you both are intrigued to why you are here. Nezu rhetorically asked. Despite that, Izuku and Himiko both nodded their heads. Well, Izuku, I'm intrigued with you. First of all, with your quirk. While both dangerous and powerful, can be used for great purposes. It obviously will have to be monitored, but I think we can keep that a secret from the Hero Commission, Nezu smiled. It was the same innocent, unnerving smile he has given this entire time, and Izuku would be lying if he didn't say he was frightened by it. Himiko seemed blissfully unaware. I also have seen your passion to help others. I mean, not anybody can make a serial killer turn over a new leaf, Nezu said, gesturing over to Himiko. This made Himiko freeze, her eyes widen and shake slightly in fear. Izuku also did the same, but luckily Eraserhead came to the rescue. You won't be punished. We understand that your quirk contorted your thoughts. Others won't understand though, so your file will be wiped and you'll be starting from scratch, Eraserhead said. Izuku sighed in relief while Himiko shakily nodded her head. Izuku reached over and grabbed her hand and gave it a reaffirming squeeze. Izuku took a deep breath before turning to Izuku and smiling. Sorry to be rude, Nezu, but I'm missing the point on why we are here. Izuku asked. Nezu chuckled, leaning back in your chair. 7, well, for a 14-year-old, you are quite intelligent, Izuku. Your old school brought you down because of your quirklessness status, but looking at your tests, you should have gone up several grades, perhaps even graduating by now, Nezu answered. Izuku only raised an eyebrow in response. Thank you, but I still don't understand, Izuku answered. Nezu chuckled with his sinister innocent laughter. It made Izuku nervous as Nezu leaned forward with his dead eyes. I want you to teach the next generation of hero hopefuls with Himiko here as your assistant, 16. Plus, Endeavor was on patrol. It was unusually late for his patrols. A bit past 5 o'clock. Now the sun is almost setting, and for heroes it's not that late, but for the number 2 hero's regular schedule, it's extremely late. These past few days have been horrible for the Todoroki family. Well, not for Natsuo, his hasn't been in the house very often. He isn't telling anyone where he is going, but both Rei and Enji have a suspicion that he is off with Tuya. Fuyumi still acts happy and tries being a good older sister, but Enji has seen her go off on the weekends when she is not at work. He doesn't stop her because why should he? He's the worst father. He hasn't been a father to any of his kids. Neglecting Natsuo and Fuyumi, failing to give proper guidance to Shoto and Zayato. But worst of all, Tuya. Horribly abusing Tuya. For it's been his biggest regret. His death. Enji watched it as he went up in flames, being told that he wasn't good enough, worse than his 5-year-old siblings. Enji had never thought about Tuya's relationship with his mother, but after looking back at it. Did he have one? Enji didn't really care too much, thinking about what a problem he was until a month after his suicide. It had taken a month of his siblings grieving, friends' condolences, and finally a talk with his wife for it to finally get stuck in his head. His eldest son is dead. He committed suicide because of him. His room had turned empty with no one ever entering it. Well, until Enji caught Fuyumi went in there late at night. Enji followed her but remained quietly at the door. He watched her walk over to the closet and opening it, revealing a shrine of Tuya. Enji watched as his daughter cried but happily talked with Tuya like he was there, asking him for help to pass her final year of high school. Not wanting to cry and alert Fuyumi that he was listening, he walked away and went outside. He's never visited the shrine because he didn't feel he had a right to. It was just for Fuyumi and Natsuo, the 2 people that Tuya didn't despise. But now he was alive. He never died. Enji isn't sure how, but he thinks that Tuya might have faked it. He isn't sure, but he wouldn't blame Tuya if he had done that. Any means necessary to escape home. Him and his wife had remained silent about Tuya being alive. But Rei was oddly persistent that it wasn't him, that it couldn't have been him. Enji wasn't sure why, but he knew it was. Tuya ending up at their house with Natsuo and Fuyumi seemed to convince her though that it in fact was him. Enji sighed as he walked along. He does care about his eldest son now, but what right does he have to talk to him? If he doesn't want to be anywhere near him, then he has that right too. He lost his right to call himself a father when he first started training 𝗬𝗧𝗏. Oi, how much for the stuff, man? Look, I need it, a man said in a voice that 𝗳𝗏𝗏 was familiar with. Drag dealers, something below his pay grade, but it's the only crime right now. It was going down in an alleyway because it was out of sight from onlookers. 𝗳𝗏𝗏 walked into the endeavor but saw something that shocked him. There were 5 men in the alleyway with 3 of the 5 currently smoking. They all looked like generic drag addicts except for one of them. He either is the dealer who didn't do drags or was new to them. But 𝗳𝗏𝗏 recognized one of the men there, 𝗬𝗧𝗏. All 5 turned to look at him, with 4 of the 5 becoming terrified. Run. One of them yelled and 4 of them all turned around and booked off running. But 𝗳𝗏𝗏 wasn't paying attention to that. He was staring at the person giving him a death glare. 𝗬𝗧𝗏 puffed out some smoke before dropping it on the ground and grinding it with his shoe. He then shoved his hands into his pockets and walked over to 𝗳𝗏𝗏. Aren't drag deals a bit too low for your pay grade, Mr. Number 2 hero? 𝗬𝗧𝗏 smirked as he tried to walk past, but 𝗳𝗏𝗏 stopped him by putting a hand on his shoulder. 𝗬𝗧𝗏, 𝗳𝗏𝗏 said gently. That made 𝗬𝗧𝗏 snap. 𝗬𝗧𝗏 jolted away from him and whipped his arm up, slapping 𝗳𝗏𝗏's hand off of his shoulder. 𝗬𝗧𝗏's face scrunched down in anger. Little blue wisps of flames ignited from the dimples of 𝗬𝗧𝗏's mouth and flames ignited from the crevasses in between his fingers. It's Derby, old man, he snapped. 𝗳𝗏𝗏 didn't flinch, just putting his arm back down as he stared at his son's heated and rage-filled expression. Derby, you shouldn't be doing this, 𝗳𝗏𝗏 said in a monotone voice. Derby scoffed, taking a step back and raising his hands out of his pocket. He puts them under his arm and crosses them over his chest. Oh, why should I listen to you, bag? I know this SHT isn't good for me, but this stuff allowed me to get through hard parts of my life. I was alone and had nothing, but this SHT kept me going. I don't need you telling me what I already know. I don't need you telling me anything, so F off. Derby barked. Fire rose from his hands again as well as the back of his head. 𝗬𝗏𝗏 sighed. He can see the hatred in his eyes. Derby must be working on pure spite a lot of the time. It's what he did when he was still around, spite of him, spite of Shoto and Ẓayato. Everything he did was out of spite when he developed deep hatred for them. To Derby, listen, Enji said. He knew he wasn't his father, not anymore. He never will be, but he has to at least try, one more time. You have a chance to get your life back. I heard you were living with Eraserhead now. You have skills and knowledge. You can do everything you have always dreamed of doing. But you can't do it by yourself, so please. Forget me, your mother and siblings, and live your life. Don't let things like me, past grudges, hold you back. Get help, Derby, please, 𝗳𝗏𝗏 says with a solemn expression. Derby looks at him oddly. His mouth is open and it seems like he wants to say something. Yell, scream, curse him out. But he stops himself. He seems to be at odds. 𝗳𝗏𝗏 watches as the random flames of wisps that Derby had formed on his body slowly disappear. Derby huffs as he shoves his hands back in his pocket before finally working past his father. Whatever, old man, Derby says as he walks away. 𝗳𝗏𝗏 gives a small smile as he watches him walk away. There was no rebuttal, insult or yelling at him. Just acceptance, which means he does begrudgingly agree with him. 𝗳𝗏𝗏 knows that Derby will never return to being 𝗬𝗧𝗏. He's failed as a father and he knows that. Yet is happy for him. He is so glad that Derby can finally move on. He might no longer be a part of the family, but Enji knows that he'll be a great hero and will be the only one of his children to become one. 9 The Yagis, Bakugos and Todorikis were all at the Yagi household. Why? Because Nezu specifically requested it. This was 2 days before the entrance exam and Nezu was just about to tell the 5 kids if they were allowed to attend the entrance exam. Maybe something a bit more as well. Eraserhead and Naomasa were also there as well. Eraserhead had a coffee and stood in the corner of the room away from everybody. Izumi sat on a couch with her parents on either side of her. Kotsumi and her father were on a different couch with Katsuki at the dinner table sitting on a chair with Mitsuki in the kitchen stopping herself from glaring at the Yagi family. The Todoroki twins sat on the floor with their mother while 𝗵𝗲𝗏 sat on the last chair. The door knocked and almost everyone tensed in anticipation. 𝗬𝗏𝗧𝗏 stood up and walked over to it. He opened the door and a small 𝗓𝗵𝗲 creature in a suit stood there at the door. 𝗬𝗏𝗧𝗏 bowed as he welcomed 𝗬𝗏 inside. "Welcome 𝗬𝗏," 𝗬𝗏𝗧𝗏 said. "Good evening 𝗧𝗏𝗁𝗃, glad that you could make it on such short notice." 𝗬𝗏𝗧𝗏 smiled innocently as he walked into the house. He ignored the tense atmosphere of it. Well, that's what it seemed like to most. 𝗧𝗪𝗧𝗏 has been working with that rat for too long to not miss the way his eye shines. The sadistic BSTRD is enjoying this. too. "Hello everyone, I presume you all know why I have you all here," 𝗬𝗏𝗧𝗏 greeted, walking to the point of the room where he could see everyone. 𝗬𝗏𝗧𝗏 was behind him and so was 𝗧𝗪𝗧𝗏 as he stood in his corner. He may not like the rat most of the time, but moments like these remind him why he puts up with 𝗬𝗏𝗧𝗏's antics. The kids all nod their heads with Izumi and 𝗧𝗏𝗧𝗏 looking especially scared. "I am here to discuss a few things with you. Your place is at my school and Izuku Yagi," 𝗬𝗏𝗧𝗏 stated. Mostly everyone flinched and froze. Katsuki held a neutral expression as he waited for the results. He didn't care if he got in or not and he knew Izuku was safe. But then 𝗬𝗏𝗧𝗏 looks over to him. Katsuki looks at him, slightly perplexed, and that perplexity only increases when the creature winks at him. Katsuki's eyes widened at it. Did 𝗬𝗏𝗧𝗏 know something? Well, it shouldn't be surprising, he is the smartest creature on Earth. But Katsuki suddenly became slightly scared. "Excuse me 𝗬𝗧𝗏, but can I ask a question?" a voice asked. 𝗬𝗧𝗏 looked over to see that it was Inko who had asked it. He nodded his head to her, telling her that yes, do share. "Are you working on my son's case?" she asked. 𝗬𝗧𝗏 then smiled widely, becoming unnerving to the entire household. All except Aizawa, who sipped on his coffee to hide his amused expression. "I got to talk with him a few days ago, in fact," 𝗬𝗧𝗏 smiled. Everyone's eyes widened at 𝗬𝗧𝗏. "So that's what you're doing. Sadistic, but I can't say I'm not interested." Aizawa thought. Inko stood up, suddenly becoming angry. "So you knew where my baby was?" she shouted. 𝗬𝗧𝗏 wasn't affected at all by her sudden outburst, smiling and nodding his head once. "Correct, I've known about his whereabouts for a few months now, as well as 2 other individuals in this room," 𝗬𝗧𝗏 stated. Inko's eyes widen and so do a lot of other people in the room. They immediately look over to 𝗬𝗏𝗧𝗏, who is looking over to 𝗧𝗪𝗧𝗏. They then look to him, who is looking at 𝗬𝗧𝗏 inquisitively. "2 of us?" 𝗧𝗪𝗧𝗏 questions, sipping on his coffee. 𝗬𝗧𝗏 hums as he grabs something out of his pocket. There were 2 pieces of paper folded up and he grabbed one, palming the other in between his paw. "Yes, and after this, other people should know who the second person is," 𝗬𝗧𝗏 said. Katsuki became very worried. The wink from 𝗬𝗧𝗏 before meant he knew something. He knew that Katsuki also knew where Izuku was. "You obviously all know the vigilante duo Hope and Camilla," 𝗬𝗧𝗏 stated. Toshinori cringed at it, lowering his hand down over his ribs that are covered in bandages. "We figured out who they both are," the house brightened. "Especially the Yagi family, as Hope is the one with all for one, meaning Izuku will no longer be at risk if he is detained. Camilla's actual name is Himiko Toga," 𝗬𝗧𝗏 said, unfolding the piece of paper. Izumi's and Kotsumi's eyes widen at the picture. It was a girl with 2 messy buns of blonde hair and cat-like amber eyes. She was about their age and had a weird and wide smile. Izumi and Kotsumi, however, recognize her. She is the person that Katsuki was hanging out in the mall at one time. "SHT, Katsuki cursed under his breath. Kotsumi instantly pushed herself out of her chair and glared over to Katsuki. He kept his cool, looking at the picture and at 𝗬𝗧𝗏, ignoring the eyes of the 2 girls and the confusion of the others. "You know her? Did you know she was a vigilante?" Kotsumi shouted. Katsuki growled, curling his hands into fists. He wasn't going to lash out. He made a promise to himself that he would keep his cool, even when others deserved an explosion to the face. "𝗬𝗪𝗧𝗏," he said with a voice clearly strained of anger. As he said the sentence, he looked over to Kotsumi with a glare. "Who is Hope?" he asked. The house were all shocked as the 2 siblings glared daggers at each other. All but Katsuki and Kotsumi looked back to 𝗬𝗧𝗏 as he chuckled in amusement. He then started to unfold the other paper. Well, this is what they look like. White hair, red horns, random patches of purple skin, metal teeth and nails, bright green eyes. Their name is also Izuku Yagi, Nezu said, smirking. The house gasped as they looked in the picture. Kotsumi, who was still glaring at Katsuki, her eyes widened at the name as her face dropped and looked over to the picture. Too, they wanted to deny it at first. With all of the features, it couldn't be Izuku. He was quirkless in the first place. How could he have the all-for-one quirk? But the features were undeniably his. Slim figure, bright smile, emerald green eyes with sincerity and kindness in them. That person was undoubtedly Izuku. So, he met all for one? Toshinori asks shakily. Nezu chuckles lightly and shakes his head. Oh no, he says his quirk is genetic and it is very likely he is telling the truth, Nezu answers. Once again, the entire house all stare at him in shock and disbelief. You had one for all when you conceived him, and since one for all was first brought into existence by all for one's brother, so you have parts of his gene. He also had quirkless symptoms because of you as well, Toshinori, as you were quirkless yourself. Because of the constant repetition of you 5 kids, Izuku himself believed he was quirkless, so he subconsciously suppressed his quirk until now, Nezu smiled. The entire house was stunned silent. Izuku always had a quirk. How is that possible? A quirk that could take the power of other quirks. It just doesn't seem possible or reasonable. Yet all the evidence lines up. Izuku is the vigilante hope and now has multiple quirks. That still doesn't explain why you kept Izuku's whereabouts a secret, Katsuki. Kotsumi shouted. Her palms started to glow as she stared at Katsuki, who was heatedly glaring at her back. Why, he mocked like the answer was the most obvious answer. Why, he asked again, raising his voice. Katsuki then slammed his hand down on the table as he stood up. Because we ruined his life. I ruined his life. What right did I have to take away happiness he finally got? You 𝗧𝗔𝗃 have no right to be angry at me. They did the same thing because it was the right thing. Katsuki shouted, pointing at Eraserhead and Nezu. 7 ga. Katsuki shouted as he felt his body being squeezed. He was lifted off the ground with a light pink hue around him. He cracked his eyes open to see Inko's hair flapping around in the air. Tears ran down her eyes as she used her quirk on Katsuki. How dare you, she shouted. But then, it stopped. Katsuki was released and he fell on the floor. His butt hitting the ground hard. Inko was confused but then felt a cloth wrap around her. She shrieked as she felt herself get yanked, her feet not moving from the ground and her hitting the floor. She looked up to see Eraserhead. His hair floating and his eyes glowing red, but his face still solemn and serious. How dare you, Green Tornado? You just assaulted a child who didn't want to have his friend go back to a place that abused him for years. That is why Katsuki is the only one in this group that will be in my class, Eraserhead threatened. Inko was now shaking in fear of the man. Toshinori stood up to go and help her, but he couldn't really do much. Everyone was afraid of Aizawa as his eyes glowed bright. Wait, only Katsuki made it to UA? Shoto asked. Kotsumi banged her hands on a chair. Why the hell did he get in? He abused Izuku the worst. She yelled in distress. Katsuki stood back as he glared at Kotsumi and the rest of his old friends as they all looked at him with a mix of betrayal, shock and anger. For you all had your chance. You all have seen Izuku on the streets, yet Katsuki was the only one to recognize him. Also, we had all a villain rehabilitation vote if you guys should be allowed to go to UA. All of you got less than 30% yes except Katsuki, who had 100%. This includes the supervisors. So my decision is that Izuku will remain where he is and that Katsuki is allowed to attend UA, Nezu says with a sickening smile. 3 Katsuki stood next to Nezu at the side as he and Eraserhead argued with the Yagis, Kotsumi and most of the Todorikis. His relationship with them is now officially destroyed. He's fine with it though. It was something that was inevitable anyway. He can't fix his past mistakes, but goddammit he is going to rectify it. Plus Katsuki looked over his old friends. They were no longer friends and right now, he knew that he was better than them. They were now trash and he is a part of normal society. He still needs to get friends, but UA will be a new starting point for him. No one will remember him and everyone will be equals. 2. So Katsuki gave them his signature. He gave them his SHT eating grin and raised his middle finger on his right hand. He was going to be a hero. 70.